Most people think self-sabotage is loud and obvious, like blowing up a relationship on purpose or quitting right before success. But the truth is quieter. It slips into your life wearing normal clothes. It sounds like "I will do it tomorrow." It feels like staying up a little too late when you know you need rest. It looks like choosing comfort over progress again and again, while telling yourself it is no big deal. And because it feels so ordinary, most people never realize it is happening until years pass, and they are standing in the same place wondering why nothing changed. Here is the uncomfortable part. Self-sabotage is almost never about laziness or lack of discipline. In fact, many people who sabotage themselves are deeply thoughtful, sensitive, and intelligent. They care a lot, sometimes too much. What they are really doing is protecting themselves from a threat their brain believes is dangerous. Not a physical threat, but an emotional one. Rejection, failure, disappointment, being seen too clearly, losing love. When the brain senses any of those possibilities, it pulls an old lever that says stop now before it hurts more. Psychology explains this in a way that feels almost cruel once you see it. The brain is designed to prioritize safety over happiness. Safety means familiarity, even if that familiarity is painful. So if you grew up in chaos, calm can feel unsafe. If you learned early on that success brought pressure or criticism, then staying small feels safer. Your nervous system would rather repeat a known pain than risk an unknown one. So self-sabotage becomes a strategy, a way to stay in control by choosing the pain yourself instead of letting life surprise you with it. Think about how often people abandon goals right when things start working. Not at the beginning, but when progress becomes real. That is not coincidence. That is when visibility increases. Expectations rise, stakes get higher, and suddenly the question is no longer "what if I fail?" It becomes "what if I succeed and cannot handle what comes next?" The brain reads that as danger, so it nudges you to procrastinate, to numb out, to create drama, to do something small that leads to a bigger collapse later. And then you get to say, "See, I knew this would not work," which feels painful, but also strangely relieving. If this hits close to home, there is nothing wrong with you. Self-sabotage is not a character flaw. It is a learned response, often formed when you were younger and had very little control. Back then, pulling away or messing things up may have been the only way to feel safe or regain power. The problem is that the brain does not automatically update these rules. It keeps running old software long after the danger is gone. So now, as an adult, it still reacts as if growth equals threat. There is also a deeper layer that people rarely talk about. Self-sabotage protects identity. If you try your hardest and fail, what does that say about you? But if you never fully try, you get to keep the fantasy of who you could have been. That fantasy can feel safer than reality, because reality gives feedback. Reality can disappoint. So staying stuck becomes a way to avoid grieving the gap between who you imagined and who you are right now. The irony is that self-sabotage does not remove pain. It just delays it and spreads it out over time. Instead of one sharp moment of fear or effort, you get a slow drip of regret, frustration, and self-distrust. You stop believing your own promises. You hesitate to dream because experience taught you that you do not follow through. And the brain takes note of that too. It says, "See, this is why we should not try." But here is the quiet truth that changes everything. Once you can see self-sabotage as protection rather than punishment, it loses some of its power. You can pause and ask, "What am I afraid would happen if I did not do this? What does my brain think it is saving me from? That question alone creates space. And in that space, something new becomes possible. The quiet ways self-sabotage shows up in daily life. It usually does not arrive as chaos. It arrives as routine, as habits that feel so normal you stop questioning them. You wake up tired, even though you could have gone to bed earlier. You keep scrolling instead of starting the thing that matters. You say yes when you want to say no. You say no when you actually want more. None of it feels dramatic. That is exactly why it works. The quiet ways self-sabotage shows up are designed to hide in plain sight. Here is the shock most people never consider. Self-sabotage often looks like being responsible, like being easygoing, like being realistic. It disguises itself as patience, humility, even kindness. But underneath it is fear wearing a calm face, fear of standing out, fear of being wrong, fear of wanting something too badly and not getting it. So instead of taking risks, you shrink your life just enough to avoid disappointment, while telling yourself you are just being practical. One of the most common forms is procrastination, but not the obvious kind. Not putting things off because you are careless. It is the thoughtful procrastination, the kind where you over-prepare, over-research, over-plan. You tell yourself you are waiting for the right moment, the right mood, the right clarity, but the truth is that clarity comes after action, not before it. Waiting becomes a way to avoid the emotional exposure of starting, because once you start, you can be judged by others, and by yourself. Another quiet form is overcommitting, saying yes to everyone else until there is nothing left for you. On the surface, it looks generous, but often it is avoidance. If you are always busy helping, fixing, supporting, then you never have to sit alone with your own desires. You never have to risk failing at something that actually matters to you. Psychologically, this is called displacement. You move energy away from your own growth and into safe places where you already know how to succeed. Then there is the habit of minimizing. You downplay your needs. You tell yourself it is not that bad. Other people have it worse. I should be grateful. Gratitude is healthy, but when it is used to silence your own discomfort, it becomes a trap. The brain learns that speaking up leads to guilt, so it stops trying. Over time, you become disconnected from what you want because you trained yourself not to notice it. Self-sabotage also shows up in relationships in subtle ways, choosing emotionally unavailable people, staying just distant enough to avoid real intimacy, picking small arguments that create space when closeness feels overwhelming. These patterns are not random. The nervous system associates closeness with risk, so it creates tension as a way to breathe again. It is not that you do not want connection. It is that your body is not sure it is safe to have it. Another quiet pattern is perfectionism, not the kind that chases excellence, but the kind that prevents completion. If something has to be perfect, it never has to be finished. And if it is never finished, it can never be rejected. Research on performance anxiety shows that the brain experiences anticipated failure similarly to real danger. Heart rate increases, stress hormones rise. So avoiding completion becomes a way to regulate fear. It feels like control, but it slowly erodes confidence. Even self-criticism can be a form of self-sabotage. That constant inner voice that says you are behind, not enough, too much. It feels harsh, but it also feels familiar. For some people, self-criticism creates an illusion of improvement, like if I am hard enough on myself, I will finally change. But the nervous system does not grow under threat. It freezes or collapses. So the criticism keeps you stuck while convincing you it is helping. If you recognize yourself in any of this, it does not mean you are broken. It means your brain learned survival strategies that once made sense. These patterns likely helped you navigate uncertainty, rejection, or emotional unpredictability earlier in life. The problem is that they stayed long after their expiration date. The brain kept choosing safety over expansion because no one taught it another way. The quiet danger of self-sabotage is not that it ruins everything overnight. It is that it slowly teaches you not to trust yourself. You stop believing your own intentions. You hesitate to dream because experience taught you that effort leads to retreat. And that hesitation becomes the real cost. Not failure, not rejection, but a life lived just below your capacity. What makes this even harder is that from the outside, everything can look fine. You can be functional, liked, successful enough, and still feel like something inside you keeps pulling the brakes when you try to move forward. That feeling is not mystery or fate. It is a pattern. And patterns can be understood, and what can be understood can eventually be softened. Because once you start noticing these quiet moments, the pause before you avoid, the excuse that sounds reasonable, the choice that feels safe but small, something shifts. Awareness creates friction, and in that friction, the automatic response loses its grip. That is where change actually begins. Not with force, but with seeing clearly what has been running silently in the background all along. How the brain tries to keep us safe by holding us back. Your brain is not trying to ruin your life. It is trying to protect it. That might sound strange when you look at the ways it holds you back, freezes you in place, or talks you out of things you actually want. But from the brain's point of view, it is doing its job perfectly. It is scanning for danger, predicting pain, and stepping in early to stop anything that feels like a threat. The problem is that the brain often confuses growth with danger. Here is the part that catches most people off guard. The brain does not care if you are fulfilled, confident, or living up to your potential. Its main priority is survival. And survival is defined very narrowly. Avoid pain. Avoid loss. Avoid rejection. Stick to what is familiar. Even if what is familiar is uncomfortable, limiting, or quietly miserable. Familiar still equals safe. This is why you can logically know that a new opportunity is good for you and still feel resistance in your body. Tightness in your chest. A heaviness in your stomach. A sudden urge to distract yourself. That is not intuition telling you no. That is your nervous system saying this feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar has risk written all over it. There is a biological reason for this. The brain is constantly making predictions based on past experiences. If something in your history taught it that visibility leads to criticism, then speaking up now triggers the same alarm. If closeness once led to abandonment, then intimacy today feels dangerous. The brain does not update these rules easily. It would rather be wrong and safe than right and exposed, so it creates protective behaviors. Overthinking, hesitating, self-doubt, these are not flaws. They are brakes. The brain applies them automatically when it senses emotional uncertainty. And the more important something is to you, the louder those brakes become. That is why you can do small tasks easily but struggle with the things that matter most. Meaning raises the stakes. Higher stakes equal higher perceived risk. What makes this even more confusing is that the brain rewards avoidance. When you back out of something scary, stress hormones drop. Relief washes over you. The nervous system calms down, and the brain takes notes. It learns that avoidance works. So next time, it pushes you to avoid sooner. Over time, this creates a loop where safety comes from shrinking, not expanding. This is also why people often say they feel stuck even when nothing is technically wrong. On the outside, life is fine. On the inside, there is a constant low-level tension. That tension comes from living in conflict with your own growth. Part of you wants more. Another part is terrified of what more might bring, and the protective part usually wins because it feels louder and more urgent. There is a specific brain mechanism at play here. The amygdala is responsible for detecting threat. It does not differentiate between physical danger and emotional risk. Rejection, embarrassment, and uncertainty light it up the same way a real threat would. Once activated, it signals the body to prepare for fight, flight, or freeze. That is when logic goes offline. You are not choosing to hold back. Your body is reacting before thought even catches up. This is why willpower alone rarely works. You cannot out-argue a nervous system that thinks it is under threat. Telling yourself to just be brave ignores the fact that your body is trying to keep you alive based on old information. What it needs is not pressure. It needs evidence of safety. Here is where things begin to shift. Safety does not come from staying the same forever. It comes from gradually teaching the brain that discomfort is not the same as danger, that you can feel nervous and still survive, that you can take a step forward and not be destroyed by the outcome. Every small action that contradicts the old fear sends a new signal. The world did not end. We are still here. But the brain needs repetition. One brave moment is not enough. It needs consistent proof. That is why change feels slow. You are not just changing habits. You are retraining a system that has been protecting you for years, sometimes decades. It is also important to understand that when the brain tightens its grip, it often means you are close to something meaningful. It does not panic over things that do not matter. The resistance shows up where growth lives. So if you notice your mind suddenly flooding you with reasons to stop, delay, or play small, that is not a sign you are on the wrong path. It may be a sign you are approaching the edge of your comfort zone. The tragedy is that many people obey these signals without realizing what they are. They mistake fear for wisdom, caution for truth, and slowly, their life becomes organized around avoiding discomfort instead of pursuing meaning. But once you see that the brain is trying to keep you safe, not stuck, something softens. You stop fighting yourself. You start listening differently. You can say, I know you are trying to protect me, but this is not danger. This is growth. And with time, patience, and small acts of courage, the brain learns a new definition of safety. One that includes expansion, not just survival, fear of change, and the comfort of familiar struggles. There is a strange comfort in problems you already know how to live with. Even when they hurt, even when they limit you, you might complain about them, wish they would disappear, promise yourself you will change someday. But when the chance to actually leave them behind shows up, something inside you tightens. You hesitate, you pull back, and suddenly the familiar struggle feels safer than the unknown freedom. Here is the part that feels shocking when you really sit with it. The brain often prefers a predictable pain over an unpredictable possibility. It is not choosing what is best for you. It is choosing what it understands. Familiar struggles come with instructions. You know how to survive them. You know where they hurt and where they do not. Change removes those instructions, and the brain reads that as danger. This is why people stay in jobs they hate but understand, relationships that drain them but feel normal, habits that keep them stuck but feel reliable. The struggle becomes part of identity. You are not just someone who is stressed or unhappy. You are someone who knows how to handle it. And letting go of that struggle means stepping into a version of yourself you have never practiced being. Fear of change is rarely about the change itself. It is about what change threatens to take away: familiar roles, coping mechanisms, stories you tell yourself about why things are the way they are. If you change, those stories fall apart, and then you have to face new questions. Who am I without this problem? What do I do if I cannot blame this anymore? What if I try and still feel empty? Psychologically, this is tied to something called loss aversion. The brain weighs potential losses more heavily than potential gains. So even if change could bring relief, growth, or joy, the brain fixates on what might be lost: comfort zones, predictability, control. It exaggerates the risks and minimizes the rewards, not because it is accurate, but because it is protective. There is also a deeper emotional layer that rarely gets named. Familiar struggles often connect you to the past, to versions of yourself that learned how to cope when things were hard. Letting go can feel like betraying that version of you, like saying it did not matter. So you hold on, not because you like the struggle, but because it feels loyal, because it reminds you of where you came from and what you survived. If you have ever noticed yourself almost succeeding and then pulling back, this is often why. Success would require letting go of an old identity, the struggling one, the overlooked one, the one who learned to expect less, and stepping into something new means being seen differently by others and by yourself. That exposure can feel terrifying. The nervous system plays a big role here. Familiar stress still registers as stress, but it is regulated stress. The body knows how to manage it. New situations bring unregulated stress, the kind that feels chaotic, so even positive change can trigger anxiety, insomnia, irritability. The body is not saying this is bad. It is saying this is new, and I do not know what happens next. This is why people sometimes feel worse right before things get better. They leave the familiar struggle, but have not yet built familiarity with the new reality. They are in between, and that in between feels unstable. The brain hates instability, so it urges you to go back, to return to what you know, even if what you know was slowly breaking you down. If you recognize yourself in this, it does not mean you are weak or afraid of happiness. It means your system learned that survival comes from predictability. At some point in your life, familiarity kept you safe. It gave you structure. It helped you endure. The problem is that what once helped you endure may now be keeping you from living. The real challenge of change is not learning new behaviors. It is tolerating the discomfort of unfamiliar peace. Calm can feel empty if you are used to chaos. Stability can feel boring if you are used to intensity. Growth can feel lonely if your old struggle connected you to others who understood it. These sensations are not signs you made the wrong choice. They are signs you are adjusting. What begins to loosen the grip of familiar struggles is not forcing yourself to leap into the unknown. It is gently expanding what feels familiar, taking small steps that teach your nervous system that change does not equal danger, letting yourself experience moments of ease without rushing to fill them with stress, allowing success to exist without immediately questioning it. There is a quiet truth underneath all of this. The comfort of familiar struggles is not real comfort. It is just known discomfort. And the fear of change is not fear of growth. It is fear of losing the map you have been using, even if that map keeps leading you in circles. At some point, staying becomes harder than leaving. And when that moment comes, the fear does not disappear. It just becomes less convincing than the cost of staying the same. That is usually when people change. Not because they are fearless, but because they finally trust that unfamiliar ground might be kinder than the struggle they already know. Why success can feel scarier than failure. Failure is familiar. Most people know how to survive it. They have rehearsed the disappointment, the self-talk, the recovery. Success, on the other hand, is uncharted territory, and that is why it can feel terrifying in a way failure never does. Not loud fear, quiet fear. The kind that shows up as hesitation right when things start working. Here is the shock most people never admit to themselves. Failure hurts, but success threatens identity. Failure confirms what you already suspect about yourself. Success challenges it. It forces you to step into a version of yourself that your nervous system may not recognize as safe yet. And the brain does not like unfamiliar roles, even positive ones. When you fail, expectations drop, pressure eases. People stop watching as closely. There is relief in that, even if it is painful. When you succeed, expectations rise, visibility increases, responsibility grows. Suddenly, there is more to lose. The brain looks at that equation and says danger. Not because success is bad, but because it brings uncertainty and exposure. Psychologically, this ties back to how the brain measures threat. It does not evaluate outcomes based on logic or potential reward. It evaluates based on risk and loss. Success introduces new risks. What if I cannot maintain this? What if people expect more from me now? What if I disappoint them later? What if this proves that I am not who I thought I was? These questions hit the nervous system before they ever become conscious thoughts. This is why people often self-sabotage right after a win. They miss deadlines. They withdraw. They downplay achievements. They create problems that pull them back to familiar ground. From the outside, it looks irrational. From the inside, it feels like relief. The system is trying to restore equilibrium by returning to what feels known. There is also something called the upper limit problem. When life gets better than what your nervous system is used to, it triggers discomfort, not joy. The brain has an internal set point for how much success, love, or ease feels normal. Anything above that can feel unsafe. So it creates tension to bring you back down, not because you do not deserve good things, but because your system has not learned how to hold them yet. Success also removes excuses. When you fail, you can tell yourself you would have done more if circumstances were different, if you had more time, more support, fewer obstacles. Success takes those stories away. It says you are capable, and with that comes a terrifying question. If I can do this, what else am I responsible for changing? That level of ownership can feel overwhelming. For people who grew up with criticism or conditional approval, success can feel especially dangerous. Praise might have come with pressure. Achievement might have led to higher standards instead of safety. So the body learned that doing well leads to stress, not comfort. As an adult, that association remains. Success triggers the same alert system that once prepared you for emotional strain. There is also the fear of being seen clearly. Failure lets you hide. Success puts you on display. People form opinions. They project expectations. They watch to see if you will mess it up. Even if no one is actually doing this, the brain assumes they are. Visibility has always carried risk in human history. Being noticed meant being judged, challenged, or targeted. The brain has not forgotten that. Another layer that rarely gets discussed is grief. Success often requires leaving behind parts of your old life, old relationships, old routines, old versions of yourself that felt familiar. Even when the new life is better, there is loss, and the brain resists loss more than it resists pain. So it clings to the known, even when the known was limiting. If success has ever made you feel anxious, disconnected, or like you want to disappear, it does not mean you are ungrateful or broken. It means your nervous system is trying to catch up to your reality. It means growth is happening faster than your sense of safety. That mismatch creates fear. What actually helps is not minimizing success or rushing past it. It is learning to stay present with it. Letting your body experience that nothing terrible happens when things go well. Allowing yourself to hold achievement without immediately bracing for impact. This is how the brain learns a new pattern. Success does not equal danger. Visibility does not equal harm. Responsibility does not equal collapse. The irony is that failure feels safer because it keeps you in a role you already understand. Success asks you to expand beyond it, and expansion always feels risky at first. But over time, what once felt terrifying becomes normal. The nervous system adjusts. The new level becomes familiar. The real question is not why success feels scary. It is whether you are willing to feel that fear long enough for it to lose its power. Because on the other side of that discomfort is not perfection or constant confidence. It is something quieter and more stable. A sense that you can move forward without needing to sabotage yourself back to safety. The role of childhood patterns and early conditioning, long before you ever made a conscious decision to hold yourself back, patterns were already forming. Not because you were weak or unaware, but because your brain was doing what it does best: learning, adapting, trying to survive the environment it was born into. Childhood is where the blueprint gets drawn quietly, repeatedly, through moments that seemed small at the time, but carried emotional weight far beyond what you understood then. Here is the unsettling truth. Most of what feels like self-sabotage in adulthood began as self-protection in childhood. The behaviors did not come out of nowhere. They were shaped by what was rewarded, what was punished, what was ignored, and what felt emotionally dangerous. Your nervous system learned rules before you had language for them. Rules like stay quiet to stay safe. Do not need too much. Do not shine too brightly. Do not make mistakes. Do not rely on anyone. What shocks many people is how subtle this conditioning can be. It is not always trauma in the dramatic sense. Sometimes it is inconsistency. Praise one day, criticism the next. Warmth that disappears without warning. Love that feels conditional on performance or behavior. A child in that environment learns to scan constantly, to adjust, to anticipate, and that hyper-awareness becomes the foundation of adult anxiety, perfectionism, and self-doubt. The brain of a child is especially vulnerable to pattern making. It does not question whether an experience is fair or temporary. It assumes it is truth. So if expressing emotions led to dismissal or ridicule, the brain learns that vulnerability equals danger. If success led to pressure or comparison, the brain learns that achievement brings stress, not safety. If being visible led to conflict, the brain learns to stay small. These lessons get stored in the nervous system, not as memories, but as responses. That is why you can logically know that you are safe now and still feel your body tense when you speak up. The past is not replaying as a story. It is replaying as a sensation. Tight chest, shallow breath, sudden urge to retreat. The body reacts before the mind has a chance to reassure it. Another uncomfortable realization is that children often blame themselves for what goes wrong. If a caregiver is unavailable, critical, or overwhelmed, the child assumes it must be because of them. That belief feels safer than accepting that the world is unpredictable. So they internalize responsibility. I need to be better, quieter, easier. That internalized belief can turn into adult self-criticism and a constant feeling of not being enough. Early conditioning also shapes how you relate to effort and reward. If effort was rarely acknowledged, you may learn not to try unless success is guaranteed. If failure was punished harshly, you may avoid challenges altogether. If love came through achievement, you may push yourself relentlessly while never feeling satisfied. These patterns are not choices, they are adaptations. Attachment plays a huge role here. When caregivers were emotionally available, children learned that reaching out was safe. When caregivers were distant, inconsistent, or intrusive, children learned to self-regulate alone. That can look like independence on the surface, but underneath there is often a deep discomfort with relying on others. In adulthood, that can show up as pushing people away, downplaying needs, or sabotaging closeness before it has a chance to disappoint. What makes this even more complex is that these patterns often helped you succeed in some ways. Being hypervigilant may have made you responsible. Being self-sufficient may have made you capable. Being cautious may have kept you out of trouble. So the brain sees no reason to let them go. It does not know that the context has changed. It only knows that these strategies once kept you safe. The cost appears later, when the same strategies that protected you now limit you. When staying small keeps you from being seen. When over-control drains joy. When avoidance keeps you from growth. And because these patterns feel like who you are, not something you learned, they are hard to question. It feels like personality, not conditioning. This is where compassion becomes essential. You cannot shame yourself out of patterns that were built to protect you. The nervous system does not respond to criticism. It responds to safety. When you start to see your behaviors as learned responses instead of personal failures, the internal fight softens. You stop asking what is wrong with me and start asking what happened to me. There is also power in recognizing that patterns can be updated. The brain is plastic. It changes with experience, but it changes slowly and through repetition, not through insight alone. Each time you respond differently, even in a small way, you offer your nervous system new data. This did not end badly. I survived this. I am still safe. Reparenting yourself is not about blaming the past. It is about giving yourself now what you did not consistently receive then. Validation, consistency, permission to rest, permission to want more. Over time, the body learns that the rules have changed. That effort does not always lead to punishment. That visibility does not always lead to harm. That connection does not always disappear. The patterns formed in childhood feel powerful because they were learned when you were powerless. But you are not powerless anymore. The fact that you are aware of them means the process has already begun. Awareness does not erase the past, but it loosens its grip. Understanding the role of early conditioning does not mean your life is determined by it. It means your struggles make sense. And when something makes sense, it stops feeling like a personal defect and starts feeling like something that can be worked with. That shift alone changes how you move through the world. Quietly, gently, but in a way that finally points forward instead of back. How past experiences quietly shape present decisions. Most decisions feel like they happen in the present. You weigh options, consider consequences, tell yourself you are being rational, but underneath that conscious process, something quieter is steering the wheel. Past experiences, not as memories you actively recall, but as assumptions your body already believes. By the time you think you are choosing, a lot has already been decided for you. Here is what is unsettling once you notice it. You are often reacting to situations that are no longer happening. Your brain is responding to echoes, old outcomes, old disappointments, old moments where things did not go the way you hoped. Those experiences leave behind impressions, and impressions quietly shape what feels safe, possible, or off limits long before logic enters the room. The brain works by prediction. It constantly asks what happened last time something like this occurred. Then it uses that information to guide your next move. If speaking up once led to embarrassment, your body remembers. If trusting someone led to betrayal, your nervous system stores that data. You do not need to consciously think about it. The reaction shows up automatically as hesitation, tension, or an urge to pull away. This is why two people can face the same situation and respond completely differently. One sees opportunity, the other feels dread. It is not about the situation itself. It is about what their past taught them to expect. The brain does not ask what is objectively true. It asks what has been true before and assumes it will be true again. What shocks many people is how early this conditioning starts. Experiences from childhood and adolescence shape core beliefs about effort, trust, and worth. If your efforts were ignored, you may unconsciously stop trying when things matter. If mistakes were punished, you may avoid risks even when the reward is high. If love felt inconsistent, you may anticipate loss even in healthy connections. These beliefs rarely sound dramatic in your head. They show up as quiet conclusions. This is probably not worth it. I should not get my hopes up. I will deal with it later. Those thoughts feel reasonable. They feel like maturity, but often they are echoes of a younger version of you trying to avoid pain. The body plays a huge role in this process. Past experiences are not stored only as thoughts. They are stored as sensations. Tight shoulders, shallow breathing, a knot in the stomach. When a present moment resembles a past threat, the body reacts first. The mind then builds a story to explain that reaction. You call it intuition or logic, but it started as a physiological response. There is a psychological principle called conditioning that explains this. When a neutral situation becomes associated with a negative outcome, the brain links them together. Over time, the situation alone triggers the response. You might not remember the original event clearly, but your nervous system remembers how it felt. So you avoid, you delay, you downplay, and you feel justified doing so. This is especially powerful when past experiences involved emotional pain rather than physical harm. Emotional pain is harder to name and easier to normalize. You tell yourself it was not that bad, that other people had it worse, but the nervous system does not compare. It only knows what overwhelmed it at the time. So the lesson sticks. Another quiet way the past shapes the present is through identity. You form a sense of who you are based on what you experienced. The responsible one, the difficult one, the invisible one, the one who has to work harder. Those identities become filters. You make decisions that reinforce them, even when they limit you. Not because you want to suffer, but because consistency feels safe. This is why change can feel so uncomfortable. It threatens not just habits, but identity. If you act differently, who are you now? If you succeed where you once failed, what does that mean about the story you have been telling yourself? the brain resists that uncertainty. So, it nudges you back toward familiar choices that keep the narrative intact. Past experiences also shape what you believe you deserve. If your needs were often unmet, you may stop expecting much. You settle, you minimize, you accept less than what you want and tell yourself you are being realistic. But underneath, there is often a learned belief that wanting more leads to disappointment. So you protect yourself by not wanting too much at all. The hardest part is that these patterns feel invisible from the inside. They feel like preference, personality, or common sense. That is why people often say, "I do not know why I keep making the same choices." The reason is not a lack of willpower. It is a system that learned to prioritize safety based on outdated information. Awareness begins to change this, but not instantly. When you start noticing that a reaction might belong to the past, not the present, you create a pause. In that pause, you can ask a different question. Is this actually dangerous, or does it just feel familiar? That question alone weakens the automatic response. What helps the brain update is new experiences that contradict old expectations. Small ones, repeated ones. Moments where you speak up and nothing bad happens. Where you trust a little and are met with respect. Where you try and survive the outcome, even if it is imperfect. Each experience sends new data to the nervous system. This is different. We are still safe. It is important to understand that unlearning is slower than learning. The brain holds onto protective patterns tightly because they once mattered. So patience is essential. You are not erasing the past. You are teaching your system that the present is not the same place anymore. The quiet truth is that past experiences will always influence you to some degree. That is part of being human. The goal is not to become unaffected, but to become aware. When awareness grows, choice returns. You are no longer just reacting, you are responding. And when you respond instead of react, decisions begin to feel different, less automatic, less constrained by old fears, more aligned with who you are now, not who you had to be then. That is how the past loosens its grip, not through force, but through understanding. Perfectionism as a gentle form of self-sabotage. Perfectionism rarely announces itself as a problem. It usually shows up as high standards, strong work ethic, pride in doing things well. It feels responsible, admirable even. But over time, something subtle happens. Progress slows. Joy drains out. You start avoiding the very things you care about most. And that is when perfectionism quietly turns into a gentle form of self-sabotage. Here is the shock most people miss. Perfectionism is not about excellence. It is about control. Specifically, controlling the risk of disappointment, criticism, or shame. When something has to be perfect, it gives you a reason not to begin, or not to finish, or not to share. And that reason feels justified, because who could argue against wanting things to be done right? Underneath perfectionism is fear that learned how to sound reasonable. Fear of being judged. Fear of being exposed. Fear of finding out that your best is not enough. So the mind sets an impossible standard. Not because you believe you can reach it, but because it keeps you safe from testing yourself in reality. Perfectionism often forms early. Many people learned that love, attention, or safety came from doing things well. Praise arrived when you performed. Approval increased when you succeeded. Mistakes brought disappointment or withdrawal. Over time, your nervous system connected worth with flawlessness. Trying hard was not enough. You had to get it right. So as an adult, perfectionism feels like motivation. But the body experiences it as pressure, and pressure triggers the same stress response as threat. Heart rate rises, focus narrows, creativity shuts down. That is why perfectionists often feel stuck, tired, or overwhelmed even when they care deeply about what they are doing. One of the quiet ways perfectionism sabotages you is through delay. You wait until you feel ready, until conditions are ideal, until you know exactly what to do. But readiness becomes a moving target. There is always one more thing to fix, learn, or improve before you start, so nothing ever feels finished enough to release into the world. Another way is through all or nothing thinking. If you cannot do it perfectly, why do it at all? This mindset makes consistency almost impossible. You either give everything or you shut down completely. Small imperfect steps feel pointless, but growth depends on those small steps. Perfectionism rejects them, so progress stalls. There is also a deep emotional cost. When your standards are impossible, failure becomes inevitable, and each failure reinforces the belief that you are not enough. So you push harder, raise the bar, tighten control. The cycle continues. From the outside, it looks like discipline. On the inside, it feels like constant tension. Psychologically, perfectionism is closely linked to avoidance. Research shows that people who struggle with perfectionism often procrastinate more, not less. The fear of making mistakes activates the threat system in the brain. To reduce that discomfort, the brain chooses avoidance. It feels like relief in the moment. Later, it turns into shame. What makes this pattern especially tricky is that perfectionism often gets rewarded. People praise your attention to detail, your reliability, your high standards, so it is hard to question something that seems to be working. But the reward usually comes at the cost of your internal experience. Anxiety becomes normal. Rest feels earned only after exhaustion. Satisfaction is brief or non-existent. Perfectionism also narrows your identity. You become someone who performs rather than explores, someone who proves rather than experiments. Curiosity gets replaced with caution. Playfulness disappears because play requires permission to be bad at something. And being bad feels dangerous when your worth is tied to getting things right. Another quiet sabotage is how perfectionism affects relationships. You may hold yourself to impossible standards and unconsciously expect the same from others, or you may hide parts of yourself that feel messy or unfinished. That creates distance. People connect through imperfection, not polish. When everything has to look together, intimacy struggles to grow. If this resonates, it does not mean you need to abandon standards or stop caring. The issue is not wanting to do things well. The issue is using perfection as protection. When the goal shifts from doing your best to avoiding discomfort, perfectionism stops serving you. The nervous system does not need perfect outcomes to feel safe. It needs evidence that mistakes are survivable. That effort does not lead to rejection. That being seen as you are does not result in harm. Perfectionism blocks that learning because it keeps you from fully showing up. What begins to soften perfectionism is not forcing yourself to lower standards overnight. It is noticing what the standard is protecting you from. What do you fear would happen if this were imperfect? If you were visible before you felt ready? If you allowed yourself to learn in public? Those questions point to the real work. There is also power in practicing done instead of perfect, completing something at 70% and letting it exist, allowing discomfort without immediately fixing it, letting your body experience that nothing terrible happens when things are not flawless. This is how the brain updates its rules. Perfectionism tells you that safety lives in control, but real safety comes from flexibility, from knowing you can adapt, recover. Try again. The more you allow imperfection, the more resilient you become. And resilience, not perfection, is what actually supports growth. The quiet truth is that perfectionism is often a sign that you care deeply. But care does not have to hurt. When you loosen the grip just enough to let yourself be human, something surprising happens. Progress feels lighter. Creativity returns. Effort becomes sustainable. Perfectionism may have once helped you survive, succeed, or be accepted. That does not mean it needs to run your life now. You can appreciate what it did without letting it decide what is possible next. And in that shift, self-sabotage begins to lose one of its most convincing disguises. The need for control and why letting go feels unsafe. Control often feels like strength, like responsibility, like being on top of things. It shows up as planning ahead, thinking things through, staying prepared. From the outside, it looks grounded, but underneath, the need for control is usually not about confidence. It is about fear, and the reason letting go feels unsafe is because control once kept you from something worse. Here is the uncomfortable truth most people do not realize. The need for control is not about wanting power. It is about avoiding vulnerability. When you control outcomes, routines, expectations, or even other people, you reduce uncertainty. And uncertainty is what the nervous system fears most, not because it is always dangerous, but because it cannot predict how it will end. For many people, control developed early. When life felt unpredictable, emotionally unstable, or inconsistent, control became a coping strategy. If adults around you were unreliable, you learned to rely on yourself. If emotions were overwhelming or dismissed, you learned to manage them quietly. Control gave you structure when there was none. It created a sense of safety in environments where safety was not guaranteed. The shock comes when you realize that what once protected you can later imprison you. Control feels like security, but it comes with a cost. Constant monitoring, tension in the body, difficulty resting, a low-level anxiety that never fully shuts off. Because to maintain control, you have to stay alert. You have to anticipate what could go wrong. And that keeps the nervous system in a state of readiness, not ease. Letting go feels unsafe because it threatens that illusion of preparedness. When you loosen control, you are forced to trust something you cannot manage completely. Other people, timing, outcomes, yourself. And if your past taught you that trust led to disappointment or chaos, your body remembers. It reacts as if danger is imminent, even when nothing bad is actually happening. This is why surrendering control can trigger anxiety, irritability, or even panic. Not because letting go is wrong, but because it removes a familiar buffer. The brain reads that as exposure. Suddenly you are not braced, not guarded, and the system says this is risky. There is also a deeper layer tied to identity. Control often becomes part of how you see yourself. The responsible one, the capable one, the one who keeps things together. Letting go can feel like losing that role. And without it, who are you? That question alone can feel destabilizing. So the mind tightens its grip, not wanting to face the uncertainty of a new self-image. Psychologically, the need for control is linked to the brain's threat response. When the amygdala senses uncertainty, it looks for ways to reduce it. Control is one of the fastest ways to do that. Planning, organizing, fixing, managing. These behaviors calm the system temporarily. They create a sense of order, but because the relief is short-lived, the brain asks for more control the next time anxiety appears. Over time, this becomes a loop. Anxiety rises, control increases, relief follows briefly, Anxiety returns, so you control more, and the world begins to feel smaller, more rigid, more exhausting. You may avoid situations you cannot control, relationships where you cannot predict reactions, opportunities where outcomes are uncertain. Not because you do not want growth, but because growth requires surrendering certainty. Another reason letting go feels unsafe is because it exposes emotions that control keeps buried. When you are always managing, there is no space to feel grief, anger, sadness, fear. Letting go removes the distraction. Those emotions surface, and if you never learned how to sit with them safely, your body associates them with overwhelm. So control becomes a way to stay functional by staying numb. There is also a common misunderstanding that letting go means giving up or being careless. That belief keeps people stuck, but letting go is not the absence of responsibility. It is the absence of over-responsibility. It is recognizing what is actually within your influence and what is not. Control tries to manage everything. Letting go trusts that you can respond even if things do not go as planned. The nervous system does not learn this through logic. It learns through experience. Small moments of release. Small risks taken. Small instances where you allow uncertainty and survive it. Each time you loosen control and nothing catastrophic happens, your system gathers new evidence. We did not fall apart. We handled this. This is why forcing yourself to let go rarely works. It feels like jumping off a cliff without knowing if there is ground below. What helps instead is gradual exposure. Letting go in low-stakes situations, allowing minor imperfections, saying no to fixing something that is not yours to fix, resting without earning it. These moments teach the body that safety does not only come from control. It is also important to acknowledge that control often coexists with deep care. You control because you care about outcomes, about people, about doing things right. That does not need to disappear. What changes is the relationship to that care. Care without control allows flexibility. It allows trust. It allows you to breathe. The quiet truth is that control promises safety, but it never delivers peace. Peace comes from knowing you can tolerate uncertainty, that you can adapt, that you can recover. Letting go feels unsafe not because it is dangerous, but because it is unfamiliar. And unfamiliar always feels risky before it feels freeing. As you slowly release the grip, something shifts. The body softens. The mind becomes less rigid. You realize that safety is not about predicting everything correctly. It is about trusting your ability to respond when life surprises you. And that trust is what control was trying to create all along. Letting go is not losing control of your life. It is letting go of the belief that control is the only thing holding you together. When that belief loosens, space opens up. Space to feel, space to grow, space to live without constantly bracing for what might go wrong. And in that space, safety begins to take a different shape, one that does not require so much effort to maintain. Why we delay things that matter most. The things that matter most rarely get ignored outright. They get delayed, softly, quietly. You tell yourself you will get to it when things calm down, when you feel more ready, when you have more energy. And somehow, that moment never arrives. Not because you do not care, but because caring makes it harder to begin. Here is the uncomfortable truth. We delay what matters most not because it is unimportant, but because it is emotionally loaded. The more something touches your identity, your hopes, or your fear of loss, the more resistance it creates. Low-stakes tasks are easy. They do not threaten anything. High-stakes ones feel like they carry consequences, even if no one else can see them. What shocks most people is that procrastination is rarely about time management. It is about emotion management. When a task brings up uncertainty, self-doubt, or fear of failure, the nervous system treats it like a threat. And the fastest way to reduce that discomfort is avoidance. So the brain nudges you toward distraction. Something easy, something familiar, something that gives quick relief. That relief is not random. When you avoid a meaningful task, stress levels drop temporarily. The body relaxes, the mind feels lighter, and the brain learns something important. Avoidance works. It does not care that the relief is short-lived or that regret will follow later. It only knows that right now, the discomfort stopped. So next time, it pushes you to delay again. This is why you can be incredibly productive with things that do not matter much to you. Emails, errands, other people's priorities, but freeze when it comes to your own goals. Your dreams carry emotional risk. If you try and fail, it says something about you. If you succeed, it changes things. Either way, the outcome feels significant, so the system stalls. Another layer people rarely consider is self-worth. When your value feels tied to performance, starting becomes dangerous. Because once you start, you invite evaluation. Even if no one else is watching, you are. The inner critic gets louder. The pressure increases, so delaying becomes a way to protect your sense of self. If you never fully try, you never have to fully face the outcome. Perfectionism feeds this cycle. You wait until conditions are ideal, until you feel confident, until you know exactly how it will turn out. But the truth is that clarity comes from action, not before it. Waiting for certainty keeps you stuck because certainty is what action creates. The brain does not want to hear that. It wants guarantees, so it delays. There is also a deeper fear underneath delay. The fear of change. Starting something that matters means your life might look different on the other side. Your routines, your relationships, your identity. Even positive change involves loss. Loss of the familiar, loss of excuses, loss of the version of yourself that stayed safely in potential. That is a lot for the nervous system to handle, so it presses pause. Delay can also be a way of staying loyal to old patterns. If you grew up learning to put yourself last, prioritizing your own goals can feel wrong. You may feel guilty investing time or energy into something that is just for you. So you delay, telling yourself it is not the right time, when the real discomfort is giving yourself permission to matter. What makes this pattern so frustrating is that from the outside, it looks like self-sabotage. From the inside, it feels like protection. And in a way, it is. The brain is trying to spare you from disappointment, shame, or overwhelm. It just does not realize that the cost of delay is often greater than the cost of trying. Over time, delaying what matters most erodes trust in yourself. You start to doubt your intentions. You stop believing your own promises. And that doubt becomes another reason to delay. Why start if I know I will not finish? The cycle tightens, not because you are incapable, but because avoidance taught your system to expect retreat. The body plays a role here too. When something matters deeply, the nervous system becomes activated. Heart rate increases, muscles tense, focus narrows. That physical activation gets interpreted as stress instead of excitement, so you tell yourself you are not in the right headspace. But often, that sensation is simply energy. The energy required to do something meaningful. The way out of this pattern is not pushing harder or shaming yourself. That only adds more threat. What helps is reducing the emotional load of starting, making the task smaller than your fear, not committing to finishing, succeeding, or doing it well. just committing to beginning. Beginning teaches the brain that engagement is survivable. Another powerful shift is noticing what you are afraid would happen if you did start. Not logically, but emotionally. Would you feel exposed, disappointed, proud, responsible, seen? Naming that fear reduces its intensity. The brain feels less need to protect when it feels understood. It is also important to separate effort from outcome. Your nervous system needs to learn that trying does not equal danger, that you can act without everything being at stake. This is why playful experimentation works better than rigid goals for people who delay. Play lowers threat. Curiosity calms the system. The quiet truth is that you delay what matters most because it matters, because it touches something tender, something alive. That is not a flaw. It is a signal. And when you treat it as a signal instead of an enemy, the relationship changes. You do not need to wait until fear disappears. Fear often shows up first. You move anyway, gently, imperfectly. And with each small step, the brain updates its expectations. This did not destroy us. We are still here. Eventually, delay loses its grip. Not because you forced yourself to change, but because your system learned that moving toward what matters is not as dangerous as staying stuck, and that learning opens the door to action that feels quieter, steadier, and far more sustainable. Self-sabotage through procrastination and avoidance. You do not procrastinate because you are lazy. You procrastinate because something inside you is trying to keep you safe. That is the part most people never hear. Delay and avoidance are not random flaws. They are protective responses that activate when something matters enough to feel risky. Here is the uncomfortable shock. The tasks you avoid are usually the ones closest to your identity, the ones tied to your hopes, your self-worth, or your fear of loss. Answering a few emails is easy. Starting the project that could change your life is not. Not because it is harder, but because it carries emotional weight. And the brain treats emotional weight like danger. Avoidance works quietly. You tell yourself you will do it later, after you feel more confident, after you have more clarity, after the timing feels right. Those reasons sound reasonable. That is why the brain uses them. They soften the fear so you do not have to look directly at it. Psychologically, procrastination is an emotion regulation strategy. When a task triggers anxiety, self-doubt, or pressure, your nervous system reacts. Heart rate rises, muscles tense, focus narrows. The body wants relief. The fastest way to get it is to step away, scroll, clean, help someone else. Anything that lowers the internal discomfort. The relief feels real, so the brain learns that avoidance works. That learning is powerful. Every time you delay, stress drops for a moment. The nervous system relaxes. The brain takes note. Next time, it pushes you to avoid sooner. Over time, this becomes a habit loop. Not because you enjoy avoiding, but because your system prefers short-term relief over long-term fulfillment. What makes this pattern painful is that avoidance does not remove the fear. It preserves it. The task stays loaded, the meaning stays heavy, and now it is paired with guilt and self-criticism. You start telling yourself stories. I am bad at finishing things. I never follow through. Those stories become part of your identity, and identity shapes behavior. There is also a hidden fear beneath procrastination that few people name. The fear of finding out. If you never start, you never have to see whether you are capable. If you never finish, you never have to face how it is received. Potential feels safer than reality. Reality gives feedback. Potential stays perfect. Avoidance can also protect you from change. Starting something meaningful means your life might look different on the other side. new expectations, new responsibilities, new visibility. Even positive change includes loss. Loss of excuses, loss of familiarity, loss of the version of you that stayed hidden. The nervous system resists that uncertainty, so it delays. Many people confuse this delay with lack of motivation, but motivation usually comes after movement, not before it. The brain wants certainty first, proof that it will be okay. But certainty is created through action. That is the paradox. Waiting for readiness keeps you stuck because readiness is a byproduct of starting. The body plays a role here too. When something matters, the nervous system activates. That activation feels like anxiety, but it is often energy. Energy meant for action. If you learn to associate that sensation with danger, you interpret it as a sign to stop, so you wait for calm. Calm never arrives because the energy has nowhere to go. Self-sabotage through procrastination is gentle but costly. It slowly erodes trust in yourself. You stop believing your own intentions. You hesitate to dream because experience taught you that you retreat. That erosion hurts more than any single failure would have. What actually helps is not forcing yourself to finish. It is reducing the emotional stakes of beginning, committing to 5 minutes instead of the whole outcome, allowing yourself to do it poorly, letting the action be imperfect. These choices lower the threat level enough for the nervous system to stay engaged. Another shift is getting curious about what you are protecting yourself from. Not intellectually, but emotionally. Shame, disappointment, responsibility, being seen. Naming the fear reduces its intensity. The brain relaxes when it feels understood. Procrastination is not your enemy. It is a signal. It tells you something matters and something feels unsafe. When you listen instead of shame yourself, the pattern loosens. You move not because fear disappeared, but because you learned you can carry it. Avoidance fades when your system learns that engagement is survivable. That effort does not equal harm. That you can begin without everything being at stake. And once that learning starts, action becomes quieter, steadier, and far more honest. The inner critic and its soothing but misleading voice. Everyone has that little voice inside. The one that comments on everything you do. That whispers you are not good enough, not ready, not capable. At first, it feels harsh, but over time it becomes strangely familiar, almost soothing, because it tells you what to do in a way that feels like guidance. It warns you of mistakes. It predicts failure. It pretends to protect you. And the scary part is, most of the time, we believe it. Here is the part that surprises most people. That inner critic is not trying to hurt you. Its job is protection. It learned long ago that by keeping you small, cautious, and predictable, you stay safe. It does not know that staying safe is different from being trapped. It only knows that risk equals danger and danger equals pain. So it becomes loud whenever you move toward growth. Not because you are failing, but because it is panicking on your behalf. Think about the ways it shows up in daily life. You hesitate before asking for what you deserve. You overthink every choice, imagining worst-case scenarios. You tell yourself this is not the right time, that you will start tomorrow, that maybe you are not ready. Each warning feels responsible, rational, and even caring. And because it is so convincing, you start to mistake fear for wisdom. You start to obey the voice, thinking it is helping you, when really it is keeping you stuck. Psychologists call this pattern self-critical rumination. The brain runs simulations of what could go wrong, sometimes endlessly. Biologically, it is tied to the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala triggers alarm signals when it detects potential threats, while the prefrontal cortex tries to reason and plan. In the case of the inner critic, the amygdala is essentially crying wolf. It treats exposure, visibility, or growth as if it is life-threatening, and your prefrontal cortex thinks, "I should listen." This creates a loop where caution feels smart, even if it costs you everything you want. The inner critic is persuasive because it speaks in your voice. It sounds like you, thinks like you, and even recalls memories that feel true. When it says you will fail, it shows evidence, the times you stumbled, the moments you were rejected, the choices you regret. But what it never highlights is the countless times you succeeded quietly, persevered without fanfare, or adapted despite fear. It selectively feeds on fear, because fear keeps you compliant and predictable. And here is the ironic part: the voice that feels protective is often the very thing that stops you from thriving. Every caution it offers may have been useful in a specific moment of life, but left unchecked, it shapes your choices in ways that limit growth. You avoid opportunities, underplay your abilities, shrink yourself to fit expectations that were never meant for you. The inner critic masquerades as guidance while quietly eroding your confidence. Yet there is a hidden gift in all of this. The inner critic is not your enemy. It is information. It shows exactly where you feel vulnerable, where your brain is clinging to safety, and where your nervous system anticipates pain. Once you understand that, you can respond differently. You can acknowledge the voice without obeying it. You can say, "I hear you, but I am going to try anyway." That tiny act of defiance retrains the brain. It teaches your system that growth does not equal danger. Learning to navigate the inner critic is less about silencing it and more about noticing it. Treat it like a misinformed guide. Thank it for caring, then make a different choice. This practice rewires the automatic reactions that have held you back for years. Over time, the soothing but misleading voice loses its grip. You still hear it, but it no longer controls your actions. The truth most people never realize is that freedom from the inner critic does not come from being fearless. It comes from practicing small acts of courage despite fear. It comes from proving to yourself again and again that discomfort is not destruction. And once you see that the voice is misguided, not malicious, you start to reclaim space in your mind, in your life, and in the decisions you make. The inner critic is always going to be there, whispering its warnings, but its voice only has power if you mistake it for truth. The moment you recognize it as a protective, but flawed, part of your brain, you begin to step forward without waiting for permission. That is where self-sabotage begins to lose its hold. That is where growth quietly becomes possible. How low self-worth fuels repeating negative cycles. Most of us carry a quiet, invisible weight that colors almost every choice we make. It is the feeling that we are not enough, not smart enough, not attractive enough, not capable enough, not even deserving of good things. And when that feeling is buried deep, it starts shaping life in ways that feel automatic, like gravity pulling everything down. This is where low self-worth begins to fuel repeating negative cycles. Here is the part that surprises most people. Low self-worth does not just make you sad or insecure. It acts like a hidden architect, designing patterns that keep you stuck. You crave connection, success, or change, but you unconsciously choose situations that confirm the belief that you are not enough. You avoid opportunities that could prove you wrong. You tolerate behavior from others that you would never accept from someone else. And over time, the brain reads these repeated experiences as validation. See, it tells you you really are not worthy. Think about how this plays out in relationships. If you do not feel deserving of respect or love, you might find yourself drawn to people who are emotionally unavailable, critical, or inconsistent. It feels familiar in a twisted way because your nervous system interprets these dynamics as normal. You may even convince yourself that love is supposed to feel hard, that conflict proves value, or that rejection is inevitable. And each time the cycle repeats, your internal narrative reinforces itself. I am not enough. That is why this happens to me. The same principle applies to work or personal goals. You might sabotage projects right when success is within reach. Procrastination, overthinking, perfectionism, or self-criticism all spike when stakes are high. Why? Because deep down, your brain has been conditioned to expect failure, not consciously but biologically. Repeated experiences of shame, criticism, or disappointment create neural pathways that anticipate disappointment as the default. So even when the world changes, your system still predicts and prepares for pain. Low self-worth also fuels avoidance behaviors that feel rational. You skip social events, postpone applications, avoid confrontation, or decline chances to be visible. To anyone observing from the outside, it may look like laziness or lack of ambition, but inside, the nervous system is running a protective program. It is saying, staying small is safer than risking failure. It is safer than risking rejection. It is safer than seeing whether you are really enough. And in doing so, it reinforces the very beliefs it is trying to protect you from. There is a psychological mechanism called confirmation bias at play here. The brain actively filters experiences to confirm what it already believes. When you feel unworthy, your brain notices every criticism, every misstep, every perceived slight as evidence. Every compliment, success, or moment of appreciation is downplayed, dismissed, or forgotten. Over time, this creates a cycle that feels inescapable. I fail, therefore I am unworthy. I am unworthy, therefore I fail. The cruel thing is that these cycles feel automatic. You cannot will them away with logic alone. Encouragement, motivation, and good intentions are not enough. Because the brain prioritizes survival over growth, it clings to the patterns that have kept you safe. Even if safe actually means limited, stuck, or silently suffering. The nervous system interprets change as risk, even when change is positive. But there is a hidden truth that can slowly unravel these cycles. The repetition itself is a signal. It is pointing to the exact places where your self-worth has been undercut and where old protective strategies still dominate. Once you notice the pattern, you can start to intervene. Small, deliberate choices that contradict the expected failure, tiny acts that affirm your value, moments of self-compassion, and conscious reflection all retrain the brain. Over time, the nervous system learns that being seen, being vulnerable, and pursuing what matters does not have to lead to pain. Low self-worth does not disappear overnight. The cycles it fuels are deeply embedded, often decades in the making. But recognizing that they exist, naming them, and understanding how they operate is the first step toward freedom. Awareness creates friction, and in that friction, the automatic loops begin to loosen. The moment you act differently from what your brain expects, the cycle is interrupted. And every interruption is proof that the old story does not have to define you. These negative cycles can feel like destiny, but they are really just patterns, and patterns can be understood. Patterns can be shifted. Patterns can be broken. The weight of low self-worth may always be part of your history, but it does not have to dictate your future. Step by step, moment by moment, You can begin to live outside the loops your mind has been running for you. And that is where real change quietly begins. The brain's preference for predictability over happiness. Humans like to think we chase happiness, but the brain does not see it that way. Happiness is unpredictable. It comes and goes. It requires risk. It asks you to step into the unknown. The brain, on the other hand, loves predictability. It craves patterns, routines, and familiarity. Even if those patterns are boring, frustrating, or painful, they are known. Predictable pain feels safer than unknown joy. Here is the part that catches people off guard. Your brain would rather you feel a little dissatisfied every day than experience something new that might overwhelm or fail you. It prefers the discomfort you already understand to the possibility of reward that could also bring disappointment. That is why so many people stay stuck in relationships, jobs, or habits that do not serve them. The pain is predictable, the outcome is familiar, and familiarity is interpreted as safety. Think about daily routines. You wake up at the same time, eat similar meals, scroll through the same apps, and keep the same conversations going. Nothing changes. It is mundane, but it feels secure. Introduce a new habit, a new connection, or a new challenge, and your nervous system reacts with tension. Heart rate rises, breathing changes. The body interprets uncertainty as danger. The brain is not saying this is bad. It is saying this is unknown. Unknown equals risk. Risk equals threat. This preference for predictability also explains why people self-sabotage just when things are going well. Promotion opportunity or visibility triggers the brain's alarm system because it signals a break from the familiar. Success is unpredictable. Growth is unpredictable, and the brain would rather pull you back toward the comfort zone than allow you to navigate the unfamiliar. That is why procrastination, hesitation, and self-doubt spike right before crucial moments. Biologically, this comes from the brain's prioritization of survival over reward. The amygdala, responsible for detecting threats, reacts strongly to uncertainty. It cannot tell the difference between physical danger and emotional or social risk. A change in routine can trigger the same fight, flight, or freeze response as a physical threat. Even when the stakes are positive, your system reacts as if something could go wrong. The irony is that the more important something is to you, the more resistance you feel. Growth requires leaving the familiar behind, which the brain interprets as danger. So even though the opportunity may lead to fulfillment or happiness, the brain pushes you toward safety. Safety is known. Safety is predictable. Safety is what you have always survived with. Happiness is messy, temporary, and untested. This explains why habits, even unhelpful ones, are so hard to break. The familiar pattern is a neurological comfort zone. Your brain has built networks to support it. Every time you act differently, it has to rewrite those networks. That requires energy, patience, and repetition. Predictable routines are low energy. Unfamiliar change is high energy. So the brain biases toward what is known, not what is wanted. Understanding this does not make change impossible. It makes it understandable. Resistance is not weakness. Hesitation is not laziness. The nervous system is simply prioritizing survival over immediate happiness. And once you recognize that, you can work with it. You can move forward slowly, giving your brain proof that novelty is not dangerous. You can create small, controlled experiences of uncertainty that expand the comfort zone. Over time, the brain starts to learn that happiness can be safe too. Predictable pain may feel safer in the moment, but over time it creates stagnation. You miss opportunities, defer growth, and quietly train yourself to settle. The brain's preference for predictability explains why so many people live lives of quiet frustration. Wondering why they do not feel fulfilled, the comfort of the known is seductive, but it is not always aligned with what you truly want. The key is subtle, not force, not constant bravery, but repeated proof to your nervous system that you can survive change, risk, and growth. Each small step is a conversation with your brain. You are safe, even when things are new. You can trust yourself, even when life is uncertain. And gradually, the preference for predictability begins to loosen, giving space for genuine happiness to take root. Emotional comfort in familiar pain. Pain can be strange. Most people think it is something to escape from, something to fix, something to run away from as fast as possible. But there is a hidden truth many overlook. Familiar pain can feel comfortable. Even when it limits you, even when it frustrates you, even when it keeps you small. There is a rhythm to it. A predictability. You know where it hurts, how to cope, how to survive it. That familiarity creates a kind of emotional safety. Here is the part that surprises most people. Your brain treats the unknown, even if it is positive, as dangerous. Change threatens the predictability of your pain. Relief is unfamiliar. Success is unfamiliar. Happiness itself can feel threatening because it comes with uncertainty, so your nervous system often prefers a low level of consistent discomfort over the unpredictable possibility of thriving. Familiar pain becomes a strange comfort zone. Think about daily life. You stay in jobs that drain you because at least the stress is predictable. You stay in relationships that frustrate or hurt you because you know the patterns and how to navigate them. You avoid challenges that could improve your life because you know exactly what will happen if you do nothing. Pain you understand feels safer than the unknown outcomes of growth, even if staying in that pain slowly erodes confidence, energy, and dreams. There is also a psychological mechanism behind this. The brain associates repeated experiences with survival. When you have endured certain struggles before, the nervous system learns that you can survive them. But unfamiliar experiences, even positive ones, do not have a survival track record. The brain reads this as uncertainty, and uncertainty triggers anxiety. It doesn't care that the change might improve your life. It only reacts to the unknown as risk. This is why people often sabotage themselves just when opportunities arise. Right when a promotion, a relationship, or a personal breakthrough is within reach, resistance spikes. That resistance feels like hesitation, procrastination, or self-doubt. But biologically, it is your body signaling this is new. This is unknown. It might hurt. It is safer to stay in the pain you already understand. Familiar pain also connects you to identity. Struggle, limitation, disappointment. They become part of who you are. You are not just someone experiencing difficulty. You are someone who has always known it, someone who can endure it. Letting go of that struggle challenges that identity. It requires stepping into a version of yourself that you have never practiced being. That feels risky, even scary. The irony is that comfort in familiar pain is often mistaken for stability. You tell yourself, I am used to this, I can handle this, this is normal. And in one sense it is. But normal does not equal growth. Normal does not equal fulfillment. And the longer you rely on familiar pain as comfort, the more entrenched the nervous system becomes in resisting change, even when it is desperately needed. The key insight here is subtle but powerful. Recognizing the comfort in familiar pain is the first step toward change. You do not need to fight or shame yourself for feeling safe in discomfort. You simply notice it. You observe how the nervous system prioritizes predictability over potential relief or joy. And with that awareness, you can begin taking small steps to expand the boundaries of comfort. Gradually, the brain learns that new experiences, even positive ones, are not dangerous. Familiar pain is a trap disguised as sanctuary. It feels protective, it feels known, but it also limits potential, diminishes confidence, and keeps dreams just out of reach. By seeing it clearly, acknowledging it, and introducing deliberate experiences of safety outside that familiar pain, you begin to loosen its grip, and in that space, life becomes possible beyond endurance. You stop merely surviving. You start learning how to thrive. Why we repeat the same mistakes without realizing it. Most people think repeating the same mistakes is just a lack of attention or carelessness. But the truth is far more subtle. Our brains are not malfunctioning when this happens. They are following patterns that feel familiar, automatic, and safe, even when those patterns hurt us. You make the same choices over and over, not because you are doomed, but because your nervous system has learned to prioritize survival over growth. Here is the part that shocks most people. Repetition is not random. It is deeply logical to your brain. Every time you fall into the same trap, whether it is a toxic relationship, a missed opportunity, or a self-sabotaging habit, your brain takes notes. It sees a familiar scenario. It anticipates how to respond. Even if that response causes frustration or pain, the brain prefers it to the uncertainty of trying something new. Predictability, even in error, feels safer than risk. Think about relationships. You may find yourself drawn to partners who trigger old insecurities or recreate dynamics from your past. On the surface, this seems like a choice, but underneath, it is a nervous system seeking the comfort of the known. Emotional patterns are wired into your brain through experience. The more a response has been repeated, the faster it becomes automatic. By the time you are aware of it, your habits are already in motion. You are responding before thought can intervene. The same principle shows up in work or personal goals. You procrastinate, overthink, or abandon plans just as you are about to succeed. It is not laziness. It is the brain avoiding unfamiliar consequences. Visibility, pressure, responsibility, or judgment. Self-sabotage is not random chaos. It is a protective mechanism. It says, "This is new, this is unknown, this could hurt, so I will retreat to what feels familiar." That retreat becomes the very pattern that repeats. There is also a cognitive factor called confirmation bias at play. Your brain looks for evidence that aligns with your internal beliefs. If you believe deep down that you are not capable or deserving, you will unconsciously interpret experiences in ways that confirm that belief. Every mistake, setback, or criticism becomes proof, while moments of success are minimized, dismissed, or forgotten. The cycle repeats itself because your mind is validating the story it already believes. Even emotions play a role. Familiar mistakes often trigger familiar emotional patterns. Anxiety, guilt, shame, or anger can feel strangely comforting because they are predictable. New experiences, even positive ones, come with unfamiliar emotional responses. Your nervous system interprets that unpredictability as risk, so it nudges you back into the old loop, reinforcing repetition. This is why awareness alone is not enough. Knowing that you repeat mistakes does not automatically stop the behavior. Your nervous system is hardwired for pattern recognition and protection. Logic fights instinct, but instinct usually wins unless you create a system of small, deliberate interventions. Interrupting the cycle requires consistent, conscious effort that slowly retrains the brain to respond differently. Here is the subtle but powerful truth. Repeating mistakes is not proof that you are broken. It is proof that your brain is protecting you using the strategies it knows. The patterns are learned survival mechanisms that have persisted long past their usefulness. Recognizing that is the first step toward freedom. It changes the way you relate to yourself. You stop punishing yourself and start observing. Once you see the cycle, you can introduce deliberate disruptions. Tiny experiments in response, conscious choices that contradict the old pattern, moments of patience with yourself. All of these slowly retrain your nervous system. Over time, repetition loses its automatic grip. You begin to act with awareness rather than habit. And what was once unconscious, painful repetition becomes intentional, empowered behavior. The hidden insight here is that mistakes themselves are not the problem. The problem is the pattern that makes them predictable. And patterns can be understood, reshaped, and interrupted. That is why you repeat the same mistakes. Not because you are incapable, but because your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do, keeping you in what it perceives as safe territory, even if that territory is painful. Once you understand that, the way forward becomes clear. Self-sabotage in relationships and emotional distance. Relationships are supposed to feel safe, but for many people, they become a minefield of self-sabotage. You want connection, love, and understanding, but somehow you keep creating distance instead. You push people away when they get too close. You overanalyze every word, test their patience, or pick fights that seem unnecessary, and most of the time, it happens automatically, before you even realize it. Here is the part that surprises most people. Self-sabotage in relationships is rarely about not caring or wanting the connection. In fact, it is usually the opposite. You care so much that the brain interprets intimacy as a threat. Vulnerability becomes dangerous. Being seen fully risks rejection, disappointment, or exposure of the parts you fear are unlovable. So your nervous system does what it knows best. It protects you by creating emotional distance. Think about the patterns. You might find yourself ignoring texts, withdrawing after an argument, or avoiding conversations that feel too revealing. You may overanalyze every interaction, wondering if you are too much, too needy, or too flawed. Sometimes you even pick partners who are emotionally unavailable, because familiar struggle feels safer than true closeness. All of these behaviors are attempts to keep yourself safe from perceived danger, even at the cost of real connection. The shock here is that self-sabotage feels comforting in the moment. Pulling back, avoiding conflict, or creating distance reduces immediate anxiety. Your nervous system relaxes briefly, heart rate drops, and you feel a sense of control. But this relief is temporary, and over time, the same patterns push people away. The very protection you rely on to feel safe becomes the thing that isolates you. There is a psychological mechanism behind this. Attachment patterns formed early in life shape how we respond to intimacy as adults. If caregivers were inconsistent, critical, or unavailable, the brain learned that closeness is risky. It adapts by keeping a part of you distant or cautious, even when love is present. These patterns persist automatically because the nervous system prioritizes familiar pain over unknown safety. Even when you consciously want closeness, the body can betray you. Anxiety, tension, or the urge to withdraw arise before thought can intervene. You may recognize the pattern afterward and feel guilty, confused, or frustrated. But it is not a moral failing. It is your brain doing its best to protect you, based on past experience. It has learned that self-preservation sometimes looks like pushing people away. The irony is that self-sabotage in relationships often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Emotional distance triggers confusion, resentment, or withdrawal from the other person. You get proof that intimacy is risky, and your nervous system logs that proof for future reference. The cycle continues. The more you fear vulnerability, the more you protect yourself, the more isolation occurs. And the more isolation occurs, the more your brain thinks distance is safety. Breaking this pattern requires awareness and courage. Not by forcing closeness or ignoring fear, but by slowly teaching your nervous system that vulnerability is survivable. Small acts of honesty, asking for support, setting gentle boundaries, or allowing yourself to express feelings without retreat can retrain the brain. Over time, emotional distance loses its grip, and closeness becomes safer. The hard truth is that relationships will mirror the inner self. If fear dominates, distance dominates. If self-sabotage persists, connection remains shallow. But understanding the mechanism changes everything. Self-sabotage is no longer punishment or failure. It is a protective strategy that can be rewritten with patience, awareness, and intentional action. The voice of fear will always be there, whispering warnings, urging withdrawal. But when you see it for what it is, a misinformed guardian, you can choose differently. You can respond with curiosity instead of avoidance. You can take steps toward closeness even when it feels risky. And in those moments, self-sabotage loses its power, giving way to connection, intimacy, and the possibility of real love. The fear of being truly seen or known. There is a part of being human that craves connection, yet almost as strongly fears it. The fear of being truly seen or known is quieter than panic, but no less powerful. It hides behind humor, overwork, perfectionism, or constant distraction. You may seek intimacy, companionship, or validation, yet when someone begins to really notice you, your thoughts, your feelings, your flaws, you instinctively recoil. Because being seen is risky in ways the brain treats like danger. Here is the part most people never realize. The fear is not about others. It is about exposure. Being truly known means revealing parts of yourself that you have spent years keeping hidden. The doubts, the regrets, the moments you feel weak or broken. It means opening the door to judgment, rejection, or misunderstanding. And even if the people around you are loving or supportive, the nervous system remembers the times when being visible led to pain. So it reacts first and fastest, often before thought can intervene. Think about everyday patterns. You may deflect questions with humor, change the subject when someone probes too deeply, or preemptively apologize for thoughts or feelings that do not need an apology. You might overcompensate with achievement, charm, or control to distract from the parts of yourself you fear revealing. You may even avoid relationships altogether, convincing yourself that staying private or small is safer than risking exposure. The shock is that this fear can show up even when everything seems fine on the surface. You may be confident, accomplished, even outgoing, and still feel an invisible weight whenever someone gets too close. That is because the brain treats emotional exposure as unpredictability. Unpredictability triggers the amygdala, which signals threat. Stress hormones rise, and the nervous system tightens. Safety, from the brain's perspective, is not about happiness. It is about predictability. Being truly seen breaks that predictability. There is also a psychological dimension rooted in attachment and early experiences. If your early environment was inconsistent, critical, or dismissive, The brain learned that visibility equals risk. Over time, that learning becomes automatic. Even when you consciously know that others are trustworthy, the body reacts as if danger is present. The fear is so embedded that self-sabotage, avoidance, or emotional withdrawal can feel reflexive rather than intentional. Ironically, this fear often fuels the very isolation it is trying to prevent. When you hold back from being seen, relationships remain shallow, interactions feel surface level, and genuine intimacy becomes rare. That lack of connection reinforces the internal belief that exposure is dangerous. Your nervous system takes note. See, being known leads to pain. The cycle repeats itself until awareness interrupts it. The subtle truth is that being seen is not inherently threatening. It is threatening only to the protective mechanisms that your brain has built. The fear exists to preserve safety, but it confuses survival with limitation. Recognizing that gives you leverage. You can begin to practice small acts of exposure, sharing a thought, a feeling, a fear, with people you trust. You do not have to leap fully into vulnerability. Tiny steps teach your nervous system that being known does not equal danger. This fear also explains why perfectionism and self-criticism are so common. If you are afraid of being seen, you polish, control, and criticize yourself to reduce the risk of judgment. It feels like preparation, but it is actually avoidance. The irony is that the more effort you put into hiding, the more isolated and exhausted you become, reinforcing the very fear you are trying to manage. The fear of being truly seen is not weakness or failure. It is a misfiring of the brain's protective instincts. Once you understand it, you can step into your life differently. You can allow yourself to be partially known in safe spaces. You can tolerate discomfort without retreating. You can trust that exposure, handled gradually and mindfully, does not destroy you. The moment you start doing this, self-sabotage around intimacy and visibility begins to loosen. The brain learns that being seen is survivable, even nourishing. And slowly, the fear transforms, not into recklessness, but into the courage to show up as you are, to connect authentically, and to finally experience relationships without hiding behind protection. How overthinking becomes a protective habit. Overthinking rarely feels like a problem at first. It feels like intelligence, like caution, like being responsible. You replay conversations, analyze decisions, imagine outcomes, and tell yourself you are just trying to get it right. You want to avoid mistakes. You want to be prepared. You want to protect yourself from regret, so you think and think and think, and slowly, without realizing it, thinking replaces living. Here is the part most people never see. Overthinking is not about finding answers. It is about creating a sense of control. When life feels uncertain or emotionally risky, the mind steps in and says, "I will handle this. I will simulate every possible outcome so nothing can surprise us." It feels productive, but underneath, it is fear trying to stay ahead of pain. The brain loves predictability. When something matters to you, when there is emotional weight attached, the nervous system activates, heart rate increases, muscles tense, stress hormones rise. Overthinking becomes the brain's way of soothing that activation. If I can think through every scenario, maybe I can avoid getting hurt. Maybe I can prevent embarrassment, rejection, failure, or loss. So the mind spins, searching for certainty in a world that does not offer it. This is why overthinking spikes around relationships, big decisions, and moments of vulnerability. You do not overthink brushing your teeth. You overthink sending the text, starting the project, setting the boundary, or choosing yourself. because those moments carry emotional consequences. The brain reads them as potential threats and responds with hyperanalysis. It is not asking what is true. It is asking, how do we stay safe? There is a neurological reason this becomes a habit. Every time you overthink instead of acting, your nervous system experiences temporary relief. You did not take the risk. You did not expose yourself. Anxiety drops just enough to feel manageable, and the brain takes note. It learns that thinking equals safety. Action equals danger. So next time, it pushes you to think sooner and longer. Over time, this creates a loop. The more you overthink, the less you trust your instincts. The less you trust your instincts, the more you rely on thinking. Decisions feel heavier. Choices feel overwhelming. Even small things begin to feel loaded. And because overthinking feels active, you may not realize you are actually avoiding something. Growth, exposure, commitment, change. Overthinking also disguises itself as self-improvement. You analyze what you did wrong. You replay mistakes. You mentally rehearse being better next time. It feels like accountability, but often it is self-criticism dressed up as responsibility. The brain believes that if it can predict and prevent pain, it can earn safety. But all it really does is keep you stuck in your head, disconnected from the present moment. There is also an emotional payoff that is rarely acknowledged. Overthinking delays action, and delaying action delays potential failure. As long as you are thinking, you have not failed. You have not been rejected. You have not been seen. You exist in a limbo where possibility is still intact. That can feel comforting, especially if past experiences taught you that trying leads to disappointment. But the cost of this protection is subtle and cumulative. You miss opportunities. You hesitate when you want to move. You feel mentally exhausted without understanding why. The constant mental noise becomes your baseline. Silence feels uncomfortable. Stillness feels unsafe. So the mind keeps spinning, even when there is nothing new to solve. The shock comes when you realize that overthinking does not actually protect you from pain. It just changes the form of pain. Instead of the sharp discomfort of action, you live with the dull ache of indecision, regret, and self-doubt. You trade short-term anxiety for long-term stagnation. And the brain, focused on immediate relief, does not register that trade as a loss. Here is the part that brings relief. Overthinking is not a personality trait. It is a learned coping mechanism. It developed because at some point in your life, thinking ahead helped you survive emotionally. It helped you anticipate moods, reactions, or consequences. It kept you prepared. The problem is not that you learned it. The problem is that your brain never learned when to turn it off. Breaking the habit does not mean forcing yourself to stop thinking. That only creates more tension. It means noticing when thinking has shifted from helpful to protective. When it is no longer about clarity, but about avoidance. You feel it in the body. Tightness, restlessness, a looping quality with no resolution. That is your cue. In those moments, the most powerful move is small action. Not the perfect action. Not the fully thought through action. Just movement. One step, one message, one decision. Action teaches the nervous system something thinking never can. That you can act and survive. That uncertainty is uncomfortable, but not dangerous. Over time, each small action rewires the association. The brain learns that safety does not only come from thinking. It can come from experience, from trust, from resilience. And slowly, the mind loosens its grip. Overthinking fades from a reflex into a choice. It may always be part of you, but it no longer has to run your life. The connection between anxiety and self-sabotage and anxiety does not always show up as panic or racing thoughts. Sometimes it is quieter. It feels like hesitation, like a constant sense that something is off, even when nothing is obviously wrong. And one of the most misunderstood things about anxiety is how often it leads people to sabotage themselves, not because they want to fail, but because their system is desperately trying to feel safe. Here is the part most people miss. Anxiety is not just fear. It is anticipation. It is the brain living in the future, scanning for what could go wrong. When anxiety is present, your nervous system is already bracing for impact. So when an opportunity appears, a relationship deepens, or a goal starts to feel real, anxiety steps in and says, "Slow down. Be careful, do not go there." Self-sabotage becomes the brake it pulls to stop the imagined danger from arriving. From the outside, this can look confusing. You want change, but you avoid it. You want closeness, but you create distance. You want success, but you procrastinate or quit. Inside, though, it makes perfect sense. Anxiety convinces the brain that discomfort now is better than potential pain later. So it nudges you to delay, distract, overthink, or retreat. And because those actions reduce anxiety in the short term, the brain learns to rely on them. This is how anxiety and self-sabotage become linked. Every time you avoid something that scares you, your nervous system feels relief. Your body relaxes just enough to register safety, and the brain takes notes. It learns that avoidance works. That pulling back equals protection. Over time, this becomes automatic. You do not consciously decide to sabotage yourself. Your body reacts before your mind has a chance to weigh in. Think about how often anxiety shows up around the things that matter most. You rarely sabotage things you do not care about. The resistance appears when there is emotional risk, being seen, being judged, being disappointed, being rejected. Anxiety magnifies these possibilities until they feel unbearable. So the brain looks for an exit. Self-sabotage is often the easiest one. There is also a physiological component that deepens this connection. When anxiety is high, the body shifts into a threat response. Heart rate increases, muscles tense, breathing becomes shallow. In this state, the brain prioritizes immediate relief over long-term goals. Logic and perspective take a back seat to survival. This is why you can know something is good for you and still feel unable to do it. The body is voting no before the mind finishes the sentence. What makes this especially tricky is that anxiety-driven self-sabotage often feels responsible. You tell yourself you are being cautious, realistic, thoughtful. You convince yourself you are waiting for the right time or protecting your energy. And sometimes that is true. But often, it is anxiety asking you to stay within familiar limits. It is fear dressed up as wisdom. Over time, this pattern has a cost. Each act of self-sabotage reinforces the belief that you cannot handle discomfort, that you are fragile. That avoidance is necessary. Anxiety grows stronger because it is never challenged. The world starts to feel smaller. Choices feel heavier. Confidence erodes quietly, not because you failed, but because you never gave yourself the chance to try. Here is the validating part. If this is you, there is nothing wrong with you. Anxiety is not a personal failure. It is a nervous system that learned to be hyper-alert, often for good reasons. Many people developed anxiety in environments where unpredictability, criticism, or emotional volatility were present. Their bodies learned to stay one step ahead of pain. That skill helped them survive. The problem is that the brain kept using it long after the danger changed. Understanding this shifts everything. Self-sabotage stops looking like self-betrayal and starts looking like self-protection. Misguided protection, but protection nonetheless. And once you see that, you can respond differently, not with shame or force, but with curiosity. Instead of asking, "Why am I like this?" you can ask, "What is my anxiety trying to prevent right now? What does my body think will happen if I move forward?" Often, the answer is not as dramatic as the fear makes it feel. It is embarrassment, discomfort, uncertainty. Feelings you have survived many times before. The way out of this cycle is not eliminating anxiety. That is not realistic. It is changing how you respond to it. When anxiety urges you to sabotage, pause, name it. This is fear. This is my nervous system trying to keep me safe, and then take a small step anyway. Not a leap, a step, small enough that your body can tolerate it. Each time you do this, something important happens. You give your nervous system new evidence. You feel anxious and survive. You act and the world does not collapse. The feared outcome does not destroy you. Anxiety loses a bit of its authority. Self-sabotage no longer feels like the only option. Over time, the connection between anxiety and self-sabotage weakens. Anxiety may still show up, but it no longer runs the show. You begin to trust yourself to handle discomfort instead of avoiding it, and that trust is what breaks the cycle. Anxiety does not mean you are incapable. It often means you care deeply. Self-sabotage does not mean you lack discipline. It often means your system is overwhelmed. When you understand the connection between the two, you stop fighting yourself and start working with your nervous system instead of against it. That is where real change begins. Not in the absence of fear, but in learning that fear does not get the final say. Why rest and calm can feel uncomfortable. A rest is supposed to feel good. Calm is supposed to feel like relief. But for many people, the moment things slow down, something feels wrong. You finally sit still and your mind gets louder. You lie down to rest and your body feels restless. Silence feels heavy. Calm feels awkward, even threatening. And instead of relaxing, you feel the urge to get up, scroll, clean, think, plan, or worry. That discomfort is not random. It is deeply learned. Here is the part that surprises most people. If your nervous system grew up in chaos, stress, or emotional unpredictability, calm does not register as safe. It registers as unfamiliar. And unfamiliar to the brain often means danger. So when life finally quiets down, your system does not relax. It scans. It waits for something bad to happen. Rest feels like standing in an open field with no cover. The brain learns safety through repetition. If your early environment taught you that you had to stay alert to avoid criticism, conflict, or emotional shifts, your nervous system adapted. It learned to stay on, to anticipate, to prepare. Over time, that constant activation became normal. So now, when there is nothing to react to, the system feels unanchored. Calm feels like losing control, not gaining peace. This is why rest can trigger anxiety instead of easing it. When you slow down, there is no longer a task to focus on or a distraction to hide behind. Thoughts rise to the surface. Emotions you have been managing quietly show up. The brain says something is wrong because there is nothing to fix, so it creates something: worry, planning, self-criticism, mental noise, not because you enjoy it, but because activity feels safer than stillness. There is also a biological explanation. When you are used to high stress, your body becomes accustomed to stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. They become part of your baseline. Calm lowers those chemicals, and that sudden drop can feel unsettling, almost like withdrawal. The body says, "Where did the energy go? Something must be off." so it tries to bring the stress back online through thoughts or urges. This is why people often sabotage rest. You tell yourself you will relax later. You feel guilty for slowing down. You fill quiet moments with stimulation. You stay busy even when exhausted. Productivity becomes a form of emotional regulation. As long as you are doing something, you do not have to feel everything. Rest threatens that balance. There is also an identity piece that runs deep. If you learn to be valued for what you do, not who you are, then rest can feel like failure, like you are wasting time, like you are being lazy. Even if you logically know rest is healthy, emotionally it feels unsafe, because slowing down challenges the belief that your worth comes from effort, endurance, or usefulness. The shock is that discomfort with calm does not mean you are bad at resting. It means your system never learned how to feel safe without movement or vigilance. Calm was not modeled as safe. It was absent, interrupted, or short-lived, so your nervous system never built the pathways that associate stillness with security. This also explains why some people feel emotional crashes on vacations or during breaks. When the structure and busyness fall away, the nervous system finally has space to release what it has been holding. Emotions surface. Fatigue hits. Sadness or emptiness appears. It feels like something is wrong, but often it is the first time your body has permission to stop holding everything together. The important thing to understand is that rest discomfort is not a signal to avoid rest. It is a signal that your nervous system needs to relearn safety. And that does not happen through force. Telling yourself to relax rarely works. Calm has to be introduced gently, in small doses with compassion. This means starting with micro moments. Sitting quietly for 1 minute, taking a slow breath without trying to change anything. Letting your body feel the chair beneath you. Notice the urge to escape without obeying it. That urge is not danger. It is habit, and habits soften through repetition, not pressure. Over time, these small moments teach the brain something new. Nothing bad happened. We slowed down and survived. The more often this happens, the less alarming calm feels. The nervous system begins to associate stillness with safety instead of threat. It is also important to allow rest to look different at first. Rest does not have to mean complete stillness. It can be gentle movement, quiet music, nature, low stimulation activities that help your system downshift without shocking it. The goal is not perfect calm. The goal is tolerable calm. The deeper truth is that discomfort with rest is often grief in disguise. Grief for the years you had to stay alert. Grief for the safety you did not get. Slowing down brings awareness to that. And awareness can ache. But that ache is part of healing, not failure. When you stop judging yourself for struggling with rest, something softens. You realize your system has been working hard to protect you. Calm is not the enemy. It is just unfamiliar territory. And like any new place, it takes time to feel at home. Rest will not always feel uncomfortable, but it may feel unfamiliar before it feels nourishing. And that does not mean you are doing it wrong. It means your nervous system is learning a new language, one where safety does not require exhaustion, one where peace is allowed, one where you do not have to earn rest by burning yourself out first. That learning is slow, but it is possible, and it begins the moment you stop fighting the discomfort and start listening to what it is trying to tell you. How self-sabotage develops slowly over time. Self-sabotage rarely starts as a dramatic decision. It does not announce itself. It does not show up as "I am going to ruin my life today." It starts quietly, so quietly that most people never notice it forming. It begins with small choices that feel reasonable, understandable, even smart. And over time, those small choices harden into patterns that feel impossible to escape. At first, it looks like self-protection. You hesitate before speaking up because you do not want conflict. You lower your expectations so you will not be disappointed. You delay starting something important because you want to be more prepared. None of this feels harmful. In fact, it feels mature, responsible. But what the brain is really doing is collecting evidence about what feels safe and what feels risky. Here is the part most people never realize. The brain learns through repetition, not intention. It does not care what you mean to do. It cares what you actually do when discomfort shows up. Every time you avoid something that scares you, even slightly, your nervous system relaxes. The tension drops, relief comes in, and the brain takes note. It learns that pulling back works. That relief is powerful. It is subtle, but it is enough. And because the relief happens immediately, while the cost is delayed, the brain reinforces the behavior. You do not feel the long-term impact right away. You just feel calmer now. So next time discomfort appears, the brain nudges you to do the same thing again. Avoid, delay, distract, downplay. Over time, this creates a feedback loop. The more you avoid, the less tolerance you have for discomfort. The less tolerance you have, the more intense discomfort feels. And the more intense it feels, the more compelling avoidance becomes. What started as a small, protective habit slowly becomes a rigid pattern. Self-sabotage develops in the gaps between intention and action. You want to change, but something always seems to get in the way. Timing, energy, mood, confidence. The brain is excellent at providing reasonable explanations. It says now is not the right time. You need to rest more. You need to think this through. You need to wait until you feel ready. And because those reasons sound logical, you trust them. The nervous system plays a huge role here. If earlier in life you experienced criticism, instability, emotional unpredictability, or pressure, your system learned to stay alert. It learned that mistakes have consequences. That visibility can hurt. That trying and failing can cost you emotionally. So it adapted by becoming cautious, strategic, controlled. That adaptation may have kept you safe once, but it does not update itself automatically. So as life changes, the strategy stays the same. You may be in a safer environment now, more capable, more resourced, but your nervous system still reacts as if the old rules apply. And because those reactions are physical, not just mental, they feel urgent, real, non-negotiable. You feel them as anxiety, fatigue, resistance, or numbness. And you respond by pulling back. Another way self-sabotage develops slowly is through identity. You begin to tell stories about yourself based on these patterns. I am just not disciplined. I always mess things up. I am bad at follow-through. I am not the kind of person who succeeds at this. Those stories feel true because they are supported by behavior. But the behavior was shaped by protection, not by lack of ability. Each time you do not follow through, your trust in yourself weakens. And that lack of trust feeds the next round of sabotage. Why try if I never stick with it anyway? Why hope if I will just disappoint myself again? The brain prefers consistency, even if the consistency is painful. At least it knows what to expect. Self-sabotage also grows in environments that reward business over awareness. When you are constantly distracted, you do not notice the pattern forming. You move from one thing to the next, telling yourself you will deal with it later. But later rarely comes. And one day, you wake up feeling stuck, wondering how you ended up here, without remembering all the small moments that led you there. The shock for many people is realizing that there was never one big failure, just hundreds of tiny retreats, tiny silences, tiny compromises, tiny decisions to stay comfortable instead of honest. None of them seemed significant on their own, but together they built a life smaller than what you wanted. This is not meant to create shame. It is meant to create clarity, because once you understand that self-sabotage develops slowly, you also understand that it can be unwound slowly. There is no single moment where you suddenly become fearless. There is no personality transplant required. What is required is awareness at the moment the pattern activates. That moment usually feels like tension, hesitation, a familiar urge to delay or distract. That is the doorway. Not to force yourself through, but to pause and notice. What is my system trying to protect me from right now? What does it think will happen if I move forward? Often the answer is emotional discomfort, not actual danger. Each time you choose to stay present instead of retreating, even briefly, you interrupt the loop. You teach your brain that discomfort does not automatically mean harm, that you can feel unsure and still act, that you can survive being seen, trying, or risking something small. Over time, those interruptions add up. Just like the sabotage did, the brain learns new associations. Action does not equal disaster. Growth does not equal loss. Safety can exist alongside uncertainty. Self-sabotage did not appear overnight, and it will not disappear overnight. But it did not come from weakness. It came from protection layered on top of protection until it became invisible. Seeing it clearly is not the end of the process. It is the beginning of a different one where small, conscious choices slowly replace automatic retreats. That is how self-sabotage develops. Quietly, gradually, and that is also how it loosens its grip. The subtle difference between self-protection and self-harm. At first glance, self-protection and self-harm can look almost identical. Both involve pulling back, both involve avoidance, both can sound like I am just being careful, or I need to protect my energy. And that is why so many people get stuck in patterns they think are healthy, when in reality, those patterns are slowly hurting them. The difference is subtle, quiet, and easy to miss unless you know what to look for. Here is the part that most people never stop to question. Self-protection is meant to preserve your well-being. Self-harm, even the quiet emotional kind, slowly erodes it. But because the brain experiences immediate relief in both cases, it often cannot tell the difference in the moment. All it knows is that tension dropped, anxiety eased, discomfort was avoided, so it labels the behavior as helpful, even when the long-term cost is high. Self-protection expands your capacity over time. Even if it feels uncomfortable at first, it ultimately gives you more freedom, more stability, more choice. Self-harm does the opposite. It shrinks your world. It limits options. It reinforces fear. But because that shrinking happens gradually, the brain adjusts and calls it normal. Think about boundaries. Healthy self-protection looks like saying no to something that drains you so you can say yes to what matters. It may feel uncomfortable, but afterward you feel clearer, more grounded, more aligned. Quiet self-harm looks like avoiding opportunities, conversations, or risks under the label of boundaries, but afterward you feel smaller, heavier, more stuck. The action reduced anxiety, but it also reduced your life. The shock is that both behaviors can feel the same in the body at first. Relief, calm, a sense of control. That is why self-harm often disguises itself as maturity or self-awareness. You tell yourself you are being realistic. You are protecting yourself from disappointment. You are honoring your limits. And sometimes that is true. But sometimes it is fear steering the wheel. The nervous system plays a huge role here. When it senses potential emotional risk, it activates protective responses automatically. Pull back, shut down, avoid. These responses are not inherently bad. They kept you safe at some point. The problem is when they activate in situations where growth is possible and danger is low. Then protection becomes restriction. A key difference lies in intention versus outcome. Self-protection asks what supports my long-term well-being. Self-harm asks what makes this feeling go away right now. The brain naturally favors immediate relief. It is wired that way. So unless you consciously slow down and look at the outcome, you will default to short-term comfort, even if it creates long-term pain. There is also an identity component that blurs the line. If you learned early on that staying quiet, staying small, or staying agreeable kept you safe, those strategies may feel like who you are. Letting them go can feel like losing yourself. So you call it self-protection, when in reality, it is an old survival strategy that no longer fits your current life. Another example is rest. True self-protection allows rest so your body can recover and regulate. Quiet self-harm avoids action entirely under the label of rest, even when rest turns into numbness, stagnation, or avoidance. The difference is not in the behavior, but in how it affects your trust in yourself. After self-protection, trust grows. After self-harm, trust erodes. One of the clearest signs is how you feel afterward, not immediately, but later. Self-protection often brings a sense of integrity, even if it was hard. You feel aligned with yourself. Self-harm brings lingering regret, frustration, or self-criticism. You may tell yourself it was the right choice, but something inside feels unsettled. That feeling is information. This distinction is especially important when it comes to self-sabotage. Many sabotaging behaviors start as protection. The brain says, I am keeping you safe from failure, rejection, or disappointment. But when that protection becomes the default response to any discomfort, it turns into harm. Not because you are weak, but because the strategy is outdated. Understanding this is not about blaming yourself for choosing wrong. It is about updating your internal compass, asking different questions. Instead of does this reduce anxiety right now, you ask does this help me grow, connect, or trust myself more over time? That question alone changes everything. The validating truth is that you did not choose self-harm intentionally. You chose relief. You chose safety. You chose what your nervous system believed would protect you. That makes sense, and it deserves compassion, not judgment. But compassion does not mean staying stuck. It means listening more closely, noticing when protection turns into avoidance, when rest turns into hiding, when boundaries turn into walls. These shifts are subtle, but they are learnable. As you become more aware, you start to pause in those moments of hesitation. You feel the urge to retreat, and instead of automatically obeying it, you get curious. What am I protecting myself from right now? Is this danger or discomfort? Is this choice expanding my life or shrinking it? That pause is powerful. It creates space between impulse and action, and in that space, you begin to choose protection that truly protects, not protection that slowly harms. The line between self-protection and self-harm is thin, but once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And that awareness alone starts to shift how you move through the world. Not by forcing yourself into danger, but by learning when safety is helping you grow and when it is quietly holding you back. Why motivation alone isn't enough to change patterns. Motivation feels powerful when it shows up. It feels like clarity, like finally seeing the path forward. You tell yourself this time will be different. You feel energized, inspired, ready to change. And for a moment it works. You start strong. You make plans. You promise yourself you will follow through. Then slowly, quietly, something pulls you back. The energy fades. Old habits return. And you are left wondering why wanting something so badly was not enough. Here is the uncomfortable truth most people never hear. Motivation is emotional. Patterns are neurological. And emotions are temporary, while patterns are deeply reinforced by repetition. So when motivation tries to fight a pattern on its own, it almost always loses. Not because you are weak, but because the system you are trying to change is older and stronger than a burst of inspiration. Motivation comes from the conscious mind. It is the part of you that can imagine a better future. But most self-sabotaging patterns do not live there. They live in the nervous system. They were built through years of repetition, reinforcement, and survival learning. Your body learned what felt safe long before your mind learned what you wanted. So when motivation pushes you toward change, the nervous system often pulls you back toward familiarity. This is why motivation tends to spike at certain moments. After a painful realization, after hitting a low point, after seeing what is possible, pain and hope both activate motivation. But they do not automatically rewire the system that resists discomfort. So when the initial emotion fades, the body defaults back to what it knows, not what you want, what it has practiced. There is also a biological reason motivation alone fails. Motivation relies heavily on dopamine. Dopamine is about anticipation and reward. It fuels excitement and goal setting, but sustained change requires tolerance of discomfort, uncertainty, and delayed gratification. That relies on different systems entirely. When discomfort appears, dopamine drops. Stress hormones rise, and without new coping strategies in place, the brain chooses relief over growth. This is where people start blaming themselves. They say, I just need more discipline, more willpower, more motivation. But willpower is not an unlimited resource. It is affected by stress, sleep, emotional load, and nervous system regulation. If your system is already overwhelmed, motivation becomes fragile. It cracks under pressure, and then self-criticism steps in to explain the failure. The shock is that motivation can even reinforce self-sabotage. When you rely on motivation, you wait for the feeling to act, and when the feeling is gone, you stop. This trains the brain to associate action with emotional readiness instead of commitment. So every time motivation dips, the pattern strengthens. You teach yourself that you only move when it feels good. And real change rarely feels good at first. Patterns change through repetition under discomfort, through showing the nervous system that you can act even when you do not feel ready, that you can survive the anxiety, boredom, or resistance that comes with change. Motivation might open the door, but something else has to carry you through it. Another reason motivation is not enough is that it often ignores the function of the pattern. Every habit, even harmful ones, serves a purpose. Avoidance reduces anxiety. Procrastination delays exposure. Overworking numbs feelings. Self-sabotage protects identity. Motivation tries to rip these patterns away without replacing what they provide, and the nervous system resists because it does not want to lose its coping tools. Imagine telling yourself to stop overthinking without giving your body another way to feel safe, or telling yourself to stop procrastinating without addressing the fear underneath. The pattern fights back because it is protecting something. Motivation does not negotiate with that protection. It tries to overpower it, and protection usually wins. Real change happens when you work with the nervous system, not against it. When you build systems that do not rely on feeling motivated, when you make actions smaller than your fear, when you create consistency instead of intensity. The brain does not need you to be inspired. It needs you to be predictable in a new way. This is why tiny changes are so powerful. They bypass resistance. They do not trigger the alarm system as strongly. One small action repeated consistently teaches the brain something motivation never can. That change is survivable. That discomfort is temporary. That you can trust yourself to act without perfect conditions. Another overlooked piece is identity. Motivation focuses on outcomes. Patterns are tied to who you believe you are. If you see yourself as someone who always quits, always struggles, always messes things up, motivation clashes with identity. And identity usually wins. The brain will unconsciously steer you back to what feels consistent with your self-image. Shifting patterns requires updating identity through evidence. Not affirmations. Evidence. Small follow-through, small promises kept, small moments where you act differently than before. Each one sends a signal. Maybe I am someone who can do this. That signal is quiet, but it accumulates. And over time, it reshapes behavior far more reliably than motivation ever could. The validating truth is this: if you have tried to change and failed, it does not mean you did not want it badly enough. It means you were using the wrong lever. Motivation is a spark, not a structure. It can start a fire, but it cannot sustain it without fuel and containment. When you stop relying on motivation and start focusing on systems, safety, and repetition, something shifts. Change becomes less dramatic and more durable, less emotional and more embodied. You stop waiting to feel ready and start acting in small ways despite discomfort. Motivation will still visit. It just will not be in charge anymore. And that is when patterns actually begin to change. Not because you finally felt inspired enough, but because you built something stronger than a feeling. How the nervous system learns to resist growth. The nervous system does not resist growth because it is lazy or broken. It resists growth because its primary job is survival, not happiness, not fulfillment, not potential. Survival. And once you understand that, a lot of your stuck patterns start to make sense in a way that feels relieving instead of shameful. Growth always involves uncertainty, new behaviors, new environments, new versions of yourself. And uncertainty is the one thing the nervous system is designed to treat with suspicion. Even when the change is positive, even when you want it, even when it would clearly improve your life. If something is unfamiliar, the nervous system does not ask, "Is this good for me?" It asks, "Have we survived this before?" If the answer is no, it prepares for threat. This is where resistance begins, not as a conscious decision, but as a physical response. Tightness in the chest, heaviness in the body, sudden fatigue, distraction, doubt, overthinking. These are not personality flaws. They are signals from a system that learned to equate familiarity with safety. The way this learning happens is slow and subtle. Early experiences teach the nervous system what leads to pain and what leads to relief. If expressing yourself led to criticism, your system learned that visibility is dangerous. If trying hard led to disappointment, it learned that effort is risky. If change led to instability, it learned that staying the same is safer. These lessons were not learned through logic. They were learned through sensation and emotion. Once the nervous system learns a rule, it generalizes it. It does not keep it confined to the original situation. So a child who learned that speaking up caused conflict may grow into an adult who feels anxiety before sending an email, sharing an idea, or setting a boundary. The context changes, but the body responds as if the original threat still exists. This is why growth often feels wrong before it feels right. The body reacts before the mind can explain. You might logically know that applying for the job, having the conversation, or starting the habit is safe, but your nervous system does not care about logic. It cares about pattern recognition, and if growth does not match past patterns of safety, it triggers resistance. The shock for many people is realizing that resistance often increases right before a breakthrough. Not because you are failing, but because the nervous system senses unfamiliar territory. The closer you get to change, the louder the alarms can become. This is often misinterpreted as a sign to stop, but it is actually a sign that you are doing something new. The nervous system also resists growth because growth disrupts identity. Even painful identities are predictable. If you have always been the one who struggles, the one who overthinks, the one who stays small, that identity feels known. Growth threatens that structure, and the nervous system prefers a known pain over an unknown outcome. At least the known pain has rules. Another layer is energy conservation. Growth requires energy. Learning new behaviors, regulating emotions, tolerating discomfort. If your system has spent years in survival mode, conserving energy was essential. So when growth demands effort, the body pushes back with fatigue, procrastination, or numbness. Not because you cannot do it, but because your system is protecting limited resources. There is also a timing mismatch that causes confusion. The mind decides to change quickly. The nervous system updates slowly, so you feel motivated one day and resistant the next. This is not inconsistency. It is lag. The system needs repeated evidence that change does not equal danger before it relaxes its grip. This is why forcing yourself through growth often backfires. When you push too hard, the nervous system interprets it as threat confirmation. See, this is overwhelming. This is unsafe. And the resistance strengthens. Growth becomes associated with stress instead of expansion. The validating truth is that resistance is not your enemy. It is information. It tells you where your nervous system learned to stay guarded, where past experiences still live in the body. Ignoring that information keeps the pattern intact. Listening to it allows change to happen more gently. The nervous system learns safety through experience, not reassurance. You cannot think your way into growth. You have to show your system, through small, tolerable actions, that change is survivable. This is why tiny steps matter more than dramatic ones. They do not overwhelm the system. They create new data. When you take a small step and nothing bad happens, the nervous system notes it. When you repeat that step and still survive, it updates its map. Over time, unfamiliar becomes familiar. Growth becomes less alarming. Resistance softens not because you forced it away, but because it no longer serves a protective purpose. Another important piece is regulation. A regulated nervous system is more open to change. When you feel grounded, supported, and resourced, growth feels less threatening. When you are exhausted, stressed, or emotionally flooded, resistance increases. This is why timing matters. Trying to change everything when your system is overwhelmed sets you up for struggle. Growth also becomes easier when it is paired with safety cues. Slow breathing, self-compassion, predictable routines, supportive environments. These signals tell the nervous system that even though something is new, you are not alone and you are not in danger. The biggest shift happens when you stop interpreting resistance as a character flaw and start seeing it as a learned response. That reframing alone reduces internal conflict. You stop fighting yourself. You start working with yourself. Instead of asking, "Why am I like this?" you ask, "What did my system learn?" Instead of pushing through, you pause and ground. Instead of demanding transformation, you offer consistency. The nervous system does not resist growth forever. It resists until growth feels safe. And safety is built through patience, repetition, and respect for your internal limits. When you honor that process, growth stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like a gradual opening. You are not broken for resisting change. Your system is doing exactly what it learned to do, and that means it can also learn something new, slowly, gently, in a way that does not require force. That is how resistance loosens, not through motivation or pressure, but through safety earned over time. The role of shame in keeping cycles alive. Shame does not usually arrive loudly. It does not shout or announce itself. It settles in quietly, like a background hum you forget is even there. It shapes how you see yourself, how you explain your behavior, and what you believe is possible for you, all without asking permission. And once shame is woven into a pattern, it becomes one of the strongest forces keeping that pattern alive. Most people think shame is just feeling bad about something you did. But that is guilt. Shame goes deeper. Shame says there is something wrong with me. And when a behavior is attached to identity instead of action, change becomes incredibly difficult. Because now, breaking the pattern would require challenging who you think you are, not just what you do. Here is the part that is hard to see from the inside. Shame feels like accountability, but it does the opposite. It freezes you. When you believe you are flawed, your nervous system shifts into protection. You hide, you avoid, you numb, you retreat, not because you do not care, but because exposure feels dangerous. Shame tells you that being seen as you are will lead to rejection or loss. This is how cycles form. You act in a way you wish you did not. You procrastinate, self-sabotage, withdraw, or repeat a familiar mistake. Then shame steps in to explain it. Of course you did this. This is just who you are. That explanation hurts, but it also provides certainty. And the brain loves certainty, even painful certainty. Once shame is present, it becomes the lens through which you interpret everything. A setback becomes proof. A bad day becomes evidence. A moment of struggle becomes confirmation. And because shame is so uncomfortable to feel, the nervous system looks for relief. The fastest relief is often the very behavior you feel ashamed of. Avoidance numbs the feeling. Distraction quiets the voice. Withdrawal reduces exposure, so the cycle continues. Behavior triggers shame. Shame triggers coping. Coping reinforces the behavior, and each loop strengthens the belief that change is out of reach. Not because it is, but because shame convinces you it is. There is also a physiological piece that makes shame so sticky. Shame activates the same threat responses as physical danger. The body goes into collapse or freeze, energy drops. Motivation disappears, thinking narrows. This is not a mindset problem. It is a survival response. So when people say they cannot change because they feel unmotivated or stuck, shame is often sitting underneath that shutdown. The shock for many people is realizing that shame does not motivate growth. It prevents it. You cannot build a new pattern while your system believes you are fundamentally unsafe or unworthy. Growth requires experimentation, mistakes, visibility. Shame makes all of those feel threatening. Shame also thrives in isolation. It tells you not to talk about what you are struggling with. It says other people would not understand. They would judge you. They would see the real you. So you keep it to yourself. And without external perspective, the internal story grows louder and harsher. The cycle tightens. Another way shame keeps cycles alive is by collapsing complexity. Instead of seeing behavior as the result of nervous system responses, learning history, or unmet needs, shame reduces everything to character: lazy, weak, broken. Those labels feel final. And when something feels final, the brain stops trying to change it. This is especially powerful for patterns that started as survival strategies. Maybe procrastination once protected you from criticism. Maybe emotional distance once kept you safe. Maybe overworking once earned approval. Those patterns were intelligent adaptations at one point. But shame erases that context. It judges the present behavior without honoring its origin. And without understanding the origin, the pattern cannot evolve. The validating truth is this: shame is not proof that you are failing. It is proof that something inside you learned to equate struggle with unworthiness. That belief was taught, directly or indirectly. And anything that is learned can be unlearned, but not through punishment. Breaking cycles requires removing shame from the driver's seat, not ignoring responsibility, but changing the emotional tone of it. Instead of asking what is wrong with me, you ask what is happening in me. Instead of attacking yourself for repeating a pattern, you get curious about what that pattern is providing. This shift alone can weaken the cycle. When shame softens, the nervous system comes out of threat. When the system feels safer, it becomes more flexible. When flexibility returns, new choices become possible. Not perfect choices, just different ones. Self-compassion is often misunderstood here. It is not letting yourself off the hook. It is creating the internal conditions where change can actually occur. You would never expect a scared child to learn while being yelled at. Your nervous system works the same way. Another important piece is separating identity from behavior. You are not your pattern. You are someone with a pattern. That may sound small, but neurologically it is huge. It creates space. And in that space, you can work with the behavior instead of fighting yourself. When shame loosens, something surprising happens. You become more honest. You notice patterns sooner. You recover faster from setbacks. Not because you suddenly have more willpower, but because you are no longer wasting energy defending against self-attack. Shame tells you to hide until you are fixed. Growth happens when you allow yourself to be seen while still unfinished. That includes being seen by yourself with clarity instead of contempt. Cycles stay alive when shame convinces you that change would expose you as inadequate. Cycles loosen when you realize that staying the same is not protecting you from shame. It is feeding it. The moment you start meeting your patterns with understanding instead of judgment, the loop begins to weaken. Slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. Shame cannot survive in sustained curiosity, and without shame fueling the system, the cycle no longer has the same grip. You were never stuck because you did not care enough. You were stuck because shame made caring hurt. And that can change. Why breaking patterns feels like losing a part of yourself. Breaking a pattern does not just feel hard. It can feel like grief, like something is being taken from you. Even when the pattern hurts you, even when you know it is holding you back, there is a strange sense of loss that shows up when you try to let it go, and that confusion makes many people retreat right when they are closest to change. What most people do not expect is this. patterns are not just behaviors. They are identities. They shape how you understand yourself, how you relate to others, and how you move through the world. When you break a pattern, you are not only changing what you do, you are challenging who you believe you are. And the nervous system does not let go of identity easily. Here is the shock. Even painful patterns provide a sense of self. If you have always been the overthinker, the one who struggles, the one who stays guarded, the one who sabotages opportunities, that role becomes familiar. It comes with rules, expectations, a script. Letting it go creates a gap, and the brain hates gaps. Gaps feel like emptiness, like floating without a map. This is why people often feel disoriented when they stop a pattern. You are not immediately replaced with a new, confident version of yourself. There is an in-between phase where the old identity no longer fits and the new one has not formed yet. That space can feel lonely, scary, and undefined. And the nervous system interprets that as danger. Patterns also hold memories, emotional memories. They are tied to moments where you learned how to survive. Maybe staying quiet kept you safe. Maybe withdrawing prevented rejection. Maybe procrastination protected you from failure. Those strategies became part of how you stayed intact. So when you try to release them, your system reacts, as if you are abandoning an old protector. That reaction can be intense. You may feel sadness for no clear reason, anxiety without a trigger, a sense of emptiness, even nostalgia for behaviors you know are harmful. This does not mean the pattern was good for you. It means it was familiar, and familiarity creates attachment. Another layer is relational. Patterns often shape how others see you. When you change, relationships shift. Some people respond differently. Some dynamics no longer work the same way. And even if the changes are healthy, the loss of the old dynamic can feel like a loss of connection. Your nervous system notices that risk and pulls you back toward what kept relationships predictable. There is also an unconscious loyalty at play. If your pattern developed in response to family dynamics or early environments, changing it can feel like a betrayal, as if you are stepping outside the role you were assigned. The caretaker, the problem one, the quiet one, the strong one. Letting go of that role can feel like leaving something behind, even if it no longer serves you. The validating truth is this: feeling like you are losing a part of yourself does not mean you are becoming less you. It means you are shedding an adaptation that once helped you survive. That adaptation felt like you because it was all you had for a long time. The nervous system struggles with this because it equates consistency with safety. When you act differently, it does not immediately recognize that as growth. It recognizes it as unfamiliar, and unfamiliar triggers alarm, so it sends signals, doubt, grief, urges to go back. Thoughts like "this is not me," or "I am pretending," or "I do not recognize myself anymore." This is where many people stop. They interpret that discomfort as a sign they are forcing something unnatural. But what is actually happening is integration. Your system is reorganizing, and reorganization feels chaotic before it feels stable. Identity does not update instantly. It updates through evidence, repetition, small moments where you act differently and survive, where you speak up and are not destroyed, where you rest and the world does not fall apart, where you choose differently and still belong. Each moment adds a data point. Slowly, a new sense of self forms. The hardest part is that you cannot skip the grieving phase. You have to mourn the version of you that coped the best way it knew how, even if that coping hurt you. Even if you are angry about the time lost. Grief does not mean approval. It means acknowledgement. There is also fear underneath the grief. Who am I without this pattern? How do I relate? How do I protect myself now? The brain would rather return to a painful known self than step into an undefined one. That is why relapse often happens during identity transitions, not because you failed, but because the old self still feels safer. What helps here is understanding that you are not losing yourself. You are expanding. The old pattern is not being erased. It is being integrated. You can honor the part of you that learned to survive while choosing new ways to live. This is not about becoming someone else. It is about becoming more of yourself without the armor. Another important piece is patience. The feeling of loss does not mean you made the wrong choice. It means you are between selves, and that phase has no clear timeline. The nervous system needs time to recalibrate, to learn that this new way of being is stable, that it does not lead to abandonment, danger, or collapse. The tease is this: on the other side of that grief, something quiet begins to emerge, a sense of relief, space, flexibility. You start to respond instead of react. You feel less trapped by your own habits. And one day, you realize you are not missing the old pattern anymore. Not because it was bad, but because you no longer need it to feel whole. Breaking patterns feels like losing a part of yourself because for a long time, that part was how you stayed safe. But what you gain is not emptiness. It is choice, and choice is the beginning of a self that is not built around survival, but around possibility. Self-sabotage as a learned survival strategy. Their self-sabotage does not begin as self-destruction. It begins as intelligence, as adaptation, as a way to survive situations where you had limited power, limited safety, or limited emotional support. That matters because it completely changes how you understand your own behavior. You were not trying to ruin your life. You were trying to protect it with the tools you had at the time. In the beginning, self-sabotage looks reasonable, like caution, like restraint, like knowing when to pull back. It sounds like I will wait until I am ready, or I do not want to get my hopes up, or I know how this usually ends. And the reason those thoughts stick is simple. They reduce anxiety in the moment. The body relaxes. The threat feels avoided. Relief comes in. And the brain learns that this works. The nervous system is not focused on long-term fulfillment. It is focused on immediate safety. So if avoiding something once helped you escape criticism, rejection, shame, or emotional pain, that response got reinforced. The brain logged it as a successful strategy. Do this again next time. Over time, the pattern stopped being a choice and became a reflex. This is why self-sabotage often feels physical. You feel tired when an opportunity appears, distracted when you try to focus, heavy when you think about moving forward. These are not signs of laziness. They are learned bodily responses. Your system is trying to keep you within familiar territory because familiar once meant survivable. Many of these strategies formed early. Staying quiet to avoid conflict. Not trying too hard to avoid failure. Keeping emotional distance to avoid being hurt. In those environments, those behaviors were smart. They worked. They kept you regulated enough to get through the day. The problem is not that you learned them. The problem is that your nervous system never got the message that the context changed. The brain generalizes rules. So even when you are older, safer, and more capable, opportunity can still feel like exposure. Change can still feel dangerous. Success can still feel threatening. When something unfamiliar appears, the survival strategy activates automatically. Slow down. Pull back. Do not risk it. Not because you cannot handle it, but because your system remembers a time when risk hurt. There is also comfort in predictability. Even painful patterns offer certainty. If you sabotage, you already know the ending. Disappointment, but familiar disappointment. Trying introduces uncertainty. And for a nervous system shaped by instability, uncertainty feels worse than pain. So self-sabotage becomes a way to control the outcome, even if the outcome limits you. The validating truth is this: self-sabotage was never about harming yourself. It was about protecting yourself with the only strategies you had. That means there is nothing defective about you. There is no missing trait. There is just a survival response that stayed active longer than it needed to. Real change does not come from fighting this response. Fighting signals danger. It tightens the system. Change comes from updating it. And the nervous system updates through experience, not willpower. You show it safety by taking small actions that stretch you without overwhelming you. Each time you move slightly forward and nothing terrible happens, your system collects new information. Each repetition weakens the old rule. Growth does not need to be dramatic. It needs to be tolerable. Compassion is not optional here. When you treat self-sabotage as an enemy, your system stays defensive. When you recognize it as protection that is no longer needed, something softens. You stop fighting yourself, and that frees up energy to move. Self-sabotage loosens gradually as trust builds between you and your nervous system. Each follow-through is a quiet message. We can try and still be okay. You were never broken for holding yourself back. You were surviving. And now, you are allowed to learn that safety does not require shrinking anymore. How awareness gently interrupts self-sabotaging habits. Self-sabotaging habits rarely break because you finally decide to be stronger. They soften when you begin to notice them earlier, more gently, and without attacking yourself. Awareness is not dramatic. It does not shout stop. It whispers, "Here it is." And that whisper is often enough to change the direction of the pattern. Most self-sabotage runs on speed. Something triggers discomfort, the body reacts, the mind explains it, and the habit takes over before you even realize what happened. You find yourself avoiding, overthinking, numbing, or pulling away almost automatically. Awareness slows that speed down. It brings your attention closer to the beginning of the loop, where things are still fluid. What surprises many people is that awareness does not eliminate the urge. You still feel the pull to retreat or distract. The difference is that you are no longer fused with it. You can feel the urge and recognize it at the same time. That separation creates space, and space is where choice becomes possible. When awareness shows up, the nervous system pauses. It expects the familiar sequence: discomfort followed by relief. But instead of immediately escaping the feeling, you stay with it for a moment. That moment can feel uncomfortable. There may be tightness, restlessness, anxiety, or mental noise. But discomfort is not danger, and staying present with it teaches your system something new. I can feel this and nothing bad happens. Self-sabotage depends on unconsciousness. It thrives when you move quickly and do not look closely. Awareness shines light on the order of events. First the trigger, then the body sensation, then the thought that explains it, then the behavior. Once you see this sequence clearly, the habit loses its sense of inevitability. It becomes a pattern you notice, not a command you obey. There is also a kindness in awareness that force never provides. When you notice a habit without judgment, your system does not feel attacked. Shame strengthens patterns. Awareness loosens them. Instead of asking, "What is wrong with me?" you simply note this is happening. That subtle shift reduces threat. And when threat decreases, flexibility increases. Another way awareness interrupts self-sabotage is by bringing you back into the present moment. Many self-sabotaging habits are fueled by imagined futures or remembered pasts. What if I fail? What if this goes wrong? What if this feels like before? Awareness asks a simpler question. What am I actually experiencing right now? Often the answer is much smaller than the fear suggests. Awareness does not make you perfect. Sometimes you notice in the middle of the habit, sometimes after. That still matters. Each moment of noticing weakens the automatic nature of the loop. The brain begins to expect observation instead of blind reaction. Over time, this changes the pattern from the inside out. As awareness grows, you start to recognize early signals. The heaviness before procrastination, the urge to withdraw before connection, the inner bargaining before avoidance. Seeing these signals earlier gives you more options. You might still choose to pause or step back, but now it is a conscious choice, not a reflex. There is also relief in awareness. When you see your habits clearly, you stop using them as proof that you are broken. You recognize them as learned responses. That understanding reduces self-attack. And when self-attack fades, the habit loses one of its strongest sources of fuel. Awareness does not demand immediate change. It invites honesty, and honesty creates room. In that room, new responses emerge naturally. Sometimes it is action. Sometimes it is compassion. Sometimes it is simply staying present a few seconds longer than usual. Habits formed slowly, and they unwind the same way, quietly. Gradually, through repeated moments of noticing. Awareness does not force self-sabotage to stop. It gently interrupts it. And once a pattern is consistently seen, it no longer runs your life in the same unconscious way. The power of small, non-threatening changes. Big change sounds inspiring, but to the nervous system, it sounds like danger. Drastic shifts, intense plans, all or nothing promises often trigger the very resistance that keeps patterns stuck. This is why so many attempts at change collapse right after they begin. Not because you lack commitment, but because your system feels threatened. Small, non-threatening changes work because they speak the language of safety. The nervous system does not evaluate change by logic. It evaluates it by sensation. Does this feel familiar or unfamiliar? Does this feel manageable or overwhelming? Does this feel safe or risky? When a change feels too big, the system reacts with hesitation, fatigue, distraction, or doubt. That reaction is not failure. It is protection. Small changes bypass that protection. They do not set off alarms. They feel doable, almost insignificant. And that is exactly why they work. A tiny step does not demand that you become someone new. It simply asks you to stay present for a moment longer than usual. What surprises many people is that the nervous system learns through experience, not intention. You can want change deeply, but wanting does not teach your body anything new. Experience does, and experience needs repetition. Small changes repeated consistently send a powerful message. This is survivable. Nothing bad happened. We can do this again. Large changes often ask for trust you do not yet have in yourself. Small changes build that trust. Each time you follow through on something manageable, your system registers reliability. Over time, that reliability becomes internal safety. And safety is what allows growth to expand naturally. There is also less identity threat in small changes. Big changes can feel like you are abandoning who you are. Small changes feel like adjustments, not betrayals. You are not erasing yourself. You are experimenting. And experimentation feels safer than transformation. Small changes also reduce shame. When goals are huge, falling short feels personal. When steps are small, success becomes more frequent. Each small win provides evidence that you are capable of change. That evidence matters more than motivation. It slowly reshapes how you see yourself. Another important reason small changes work is that they keep you regulated. Regulation is the foundation of growth. When your system stays regulated, you can tolerate discomfort without shutting down. Small changes create just enough stretch to stimulate learning without overwhelming your capacity. Think of it like physical training. You would not expect a muscle to grow by lifting something far beyond its ability. You increase the weight gradually. The nervous system works the same way. It strengthens through tolerable challenge, not force. Small changes also make resistance visible instead of overwhelming. When a step is tiny and you still resist, that resistance becomes information. You can notice it, get curious about it, work with it. Large changes often bury resistance under pressure, making it louder and harder to manage. The power of small changes is not in their size. It is in their consistency. Repetition builds new pathways. Each time you choose a slightly different response, you weaken the old pattern and strengthen a new one. This happens quietly, without drama. Over time, something shifts. What once felt threatening begins to feel normal. What once felt impossible starts to feel familiar. The nervous system updates its map. Growth no longer equals danger. Effort no longer equals loss. Small changes also teach patience. They shift your focus from outcomes to process. Instead of asking, "Did I fix myself yet?" you ask, "Did I show up today in a small way?" That question is grounding. It keeps you in the present moment where change actually happens. The most important truth is this: you do not need to overwhelm yourself to grow. You need to feel safe enough to try again. Small, non-threatening changes create that safety. They invite your nervous system into the process instead of dragging it. This is how lasting change happens. Not through intensity, not through pressure, but through gentle, repeated experiences that say we can move forward without losing ourselves. And once your system learns that lesson, it stops resisting growth and starts allowing it.